You've been lied to about overthinking. They told you it's just thinking too much, just being careful, just trying to solve your life. But if that were true, why does it feel like fear? Why does your chest tighten at night? Why does your mind race like something is chasing you? The truth is, overthinking is a form of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of uncertainty, fear of what might happen if you finally stop trying to manage everything. And Buddhist teachings reveal a different path. For centuries, the awakened ones discovered peace, not by controlling every outcome, but by letting go, by surrendering the illusion that safety comes from endless thought. Tonight, as you listen, something will begin to change. The urgency in your mind will slow. The pressure to figure everything out will fade. You'll feel a quiet space opening inside you, like the moment after a storm when the air becomes still. And when you wake up tomorrow, you'll notice a calm you haven't felt in a long time, a strength that comes from no longer needing to hold everything together. This isn't just another talk to help you relax. This is the moment you stop running from fear and start releasing it. Are you ready? Let's begin. The moment you stop running from your thoughts, you begin to see what they were hiding. Beneath the noise, beneath the constant planning and replaying and rehearsing, there is a quiet fear whispering one message. If you don't stay alert, something will go wrong. The introduction opened the door to this truth, but now you're about to step fully inside it. Because overthinking is not random, it has a purpose. It is the mind's way of building a false sense of control in a world that refuses to be controlled. There is a tension most people carry without noticing. It feels like responsibility, like maturity, like staying prepared. But if you listen closely, it sounds more like urgency. A need to stay one step ahead of life, a belief that if you think long enough, carefully enough, deeply enough, you can prevent pain before it arrives. This is where the illusion begins. The mind confuses prediction with protection. It assumes that rehearsing every possibility will reduce uncertainty, when in reality it only multiplies it. A very short truth sits at the center of this struggle. Control feels safe even when it is imaginary. The mind would rather cling to a fake steering wheel than admit the road was never in its hands. From childhood, many people learn that thinking hard is rewarded. Solve the problem, plan ahead, anticipate consequences. These skills are useful in practical situations, but the mind quietly expands them into areas where they don't belong. You cannot solve emotions like math equations. You cannot plan your way out of grief. You cannot predict how every person will act toward you. Yet the mind keeps trying because admitting helplessness feels dangerous. It feels like stepping into open water without knowing how deep it goes. Overthinking becomes a substitute for trust. Not trust in a religious sense, but trust in the natural unfolding of life. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when we fight reality instead of meeting it. The illusion of control is exactly that fight. It is resistance disguised as intelligence. The mind says, if I can just understand everything, I won't get hurt. But life does not follow instructions. It does not pause for analysis. It moves with or without your permission. There is a subtle exhaustion that comes from trying to supervise existence. You feel it in your shoulders, in your jaw, in the tightness behind your eyes at night. Even when nothing is happening, your mind is preparing for something, preparing for conversations that haven't happened, preparing for mistakes that haven't been made, preparing for loss that may never come. This constant readiness drains the body because the nervous system cannot tell the difference between imagined danger and real danger. To your body, the threat is happening now. Buddhist teachings point towards surrender not because life is predictable, but because it isn't. Surrender is not passive. It is the decision to stop arguing with uncertainty. It is the willingness to live without demanding guarantees first. When the Buddha spoke about letting go, he was not telling people to stop caring. He was showing them how to stop clinging. Caring flows naturally. Clinging comes from fear. Think about how much energy goes into holding the illusion together. Every time you replay a conversation, you are trying to rewrite the past so it feels safer. Every time you anticipate the worst outcome, you are trying to brace yourself so it won't shock you. Every time you delay a decision because you want absolute certainty, you are trying to eliminate risk. But risk is woven into existence itself. Breathing is a risk. Loving is a risk. Being alive is a risk. Control promises immunity from this reality. It says you can outthink uncertainty. It says you can secure happiness by planning perfectly. Yet people who spend years trying to control everything often discover a painful irony. The more they tighten their grip, the more fragile they feel. Control increases anxiety because it constantly reminds you of what you cannot command. Buddhism offers a different kind of strength. Instead of controlling outcomes, you strengthen your ability to face them. Instead of rehearsing disasters, you cultivate presence. Instead of demanding certainty, you build resilience. This shift transforms fear into freedom. You stop asking, "How do I stop bad things from happening?" and start asking, "How do I remain steady when they do?" There is also a hidden cost to control that few people notice. It steals your ability to experience joy. When the mind is always scanning for problems, it cannot relax into simple moments. Even happiness becomes suspicious. You start waiting for something to ruin it. You hesitate to feel fully because you assume it will disappear. In this way, control turns life into a guarded performance instead of a lived experience. Letting go feels dangerous at first because it removes the illusion of safety. Without overthinking, you face raw uncertainty. But something unexpected happens when you stay there long enough. The fear begins to soften. You realize that uncertainty was always there, even when you were thinking obsessively. The only difference is now you are not exhausting yourself pretending otherwise. Buddhist practice often returns attention to the breath because breathing cannot be controlled indefinitely. You can guide it, but eventually the body takes over. This simple act becomes a metaphor for existence. Life continues without your supervision. Your heart beats without instruction. Your cells repair themselves without permission. The universe is not waiting for your approval to function. Overthinking interrupts this natural flow. It is like trying to manually control a system that already knows how to operate. The result is tension. You interfere with processes that would otherwise unfold smoothly. When you let go, you are not abandoning responsibility. You are restoring balance between effort and acceptance. Many people fear that surrender means giving up ambition or becoming passive. In reality, surrender clears the mind so action becomes more precise. When you are not paralyzed by endless analysis, you can respond directly to what is happening. Decisions become cleaner because they are not tangled in imagined scenarios. You act from clarity instead of panic. There is a quiet courage in allowing life to be uncertain. It requires you to stand without the armor of predictions. It asks you to trust your capacity to adapt rather than your ability to control. This courage grows gradually. Each time you resist the urge to overthink, you strengthen it. Each time you return to the present, instead of escaping into mental simulations, you reclaim a piece of your peace. The illusion of control thrives on the belief that you must carry everything alone. Buddhism dissolves this belief by revealing interdependence. Your life is shaped by countless factors beyond your awareness, other people's choices, natural events, timing, chance. Recognizing this does not weaken you. It humbles you in a way that frees you from impossible expectations. There is relief in admitting you cannot manage the entire universe. Relief in knowing you don't have to foresee every problem. Relief in realizing that uncertainty is not a personal failure. It is the nature of existence itself. As you sit with this understanding, something subtle shifts. The mind loosens its grip. The need to anticipate every outcome begins to fade. You start to sense that peace was never hidden in control. It was hidden in acceptance. Not the acceptance of defeat, but the acceptance of reality as it is. This is why Buddhist teachings emphasize presence. Presence is the opposite of control. It does not try to reshape the future or rewrite the past. It meets the moment directly, without filters. In presence, fear loses its fuel because it cannot feed on imagined scenarios. It can only exist in abstraction. Overthinking pulls you away from this simplicity. It keeps you suspended in a mental future that never arrives. Letting go brings you back to what is actually happening. The sound in the room, the feeling of the chair beneath you, the rhythm of your breathing. These details anchor you in reality, where control is unnecessary because experience is immediate. There will still be challenges. Letting go does not erase difficulty. It changes your relationship with it. Instead of reacting with panic, you respond with awareness. Instead of spiraling into worst-case scenarios, you address what is in front of you. This grounded approach reduces suffering because it eliminates the extra layer of fear created by the mind. Over time, surrender becomes less frightening and more natural. You begin to trust that you can handle life without rehearsing it constantly. You see that peace was never on the other side of perfect control. It was on the other side of releasing the need for it. The illusion dissolves slowly, like fog lifting in the morning. You notice moments of quiet where your mind would normally race. You catch yourself before falling into old patterns. You breathe instead of predicting. You listen instead of preparing. You allow instead of resisting. And in that allowing, a different kind of safety appears. Not the brittle safety of control, but the grounded safety of presence. The safety of knowing that whatever happens, you will meet it as it comes, not as 1,000 imagined versions in your head. This is the freedom Buddhism points toward. Not a life without uncertainty, but a mind that no longer fears it. Not a guarantee that nothing will go wrong, but a deep confidence that you do not need to control everything to be okay. As this realization settles, the restless urge to overthink begins to lose its authority. You see it for what it is, a habit born from fear, not wisdom. And once you see through it, you no longer have to obey it. The world remains unpredictable. People remain complex. The future remains unknown. But something inside you becomes steady, like a quiet center that does not depend on outcomes. From this center, you can finally rest. And the strange paradox reveals itself. The moment you stop trying to control life is the moment life stops feeling like something you must survive and starts feeling like something you can live. As the illusion of control begins to loosen, another layer quietly reveals itself. The mind was not only trying to manage life, it was trying to protect something even more fragile. Beneath the need to predict and plan sits a deeper fear, one that rarely speaks out loud. If control was about safety, this next fear is about existence itself. Because when the mind stops managing everything, a strange question appears in the silence. If I am not thinking, who am I? A very short truth sits here, almost hidden. The noise in your head was not just planning, it was proof. Proof that you are someone. Proof that you matter. Proof that you exist. There is a discomfort that arises when thoughts begin to slow down. Not boredom, not restlessness, something more unsettling. It feels like fading, like stepping out of a spotlight into darkness. For many people, thinking constantly creates a sense of solidity. As long as there is an inner voice narrating, analyzing, reacting, the feeling of me stays strong. The moment the voice softens, the sense of identity feels thinner, almost transparent. This is why silence can feel threatening, even when nothing is wrong. Without mental commentary, the familiar character you play inside your own mind begins to dissolve. The one with opinions, worries, plans, memories, arguments, explanations. That character feels like you. But Buddhism gently reveals something radical. That character is not a permanent self. It is a process, constantly rebuilt by thought. Constant thinking becomes the ego's way of renewing itself. Each thought says, I am here. Each worry says, this matters to me. Each memory says, this happened to me. The story keeps running, so the storyteller does not disappear. Without the story, the ego fears it will have nothing to stand on. This fear is rarely conscious. People do not wake up saying, I must think all day to prove I exist. It operates quietly beneath awareness. You feel compelled to analyze every situation, to define your feelings, to interpret every silence, to replay interactions long after they end. The mind keeps generating material because emptiness feels like a threat. Buddhism calls this attachment to self a fundamental source of suffering. Not because having a personality is wrong, but because clinging to it creates tension. The ego tries to freeze something that is fluid. It wants a stable identity in a world where everything changes, including you. Overthinking becomes a way to maintain continuity, to convince yourself that there is a fixed someone behind the thoughts. But if you look closely, the self changes depending on context. You are different with friends than with strangers, different at work than at home, different when calm than when afraid. Which one is the real you? The mind struggles with this question, so it keeps narrating to stitch together a consistent story. The narration becomes glue, holding a shifting identity in place. This is where the teaching of no self begins to dissolve the fear. No self does not mean you vanish or become nothing. It means there is no permanent, unchanging core that must be defended. You are more like a river than a statue, flowing, adapting, moving, thoughts, emotions, sensations, roles, all passing through, none staying forever. When this understanding deepens, the need to constantly affirm your existence through thought starts to fade. You realize you do not need a running commentary to be real. Existence does not depend on mental noise. Breathing happens without narration. Awareness remains even when the mind is quiet. Think about moments when you were fully absorbed in something simple, watching the ocean, listening to music, walking through nature. During those moments, the inner voice often disappears. Yet, you do not feel non-existent. In fact, you feel more alive, more present, more connected. That aliveness comes from awareness, not from thinking. Overthinking pulls you away from this direct experience because it replaces reality with interpretation. Instead of living, you are describing your life to yourself in real time. The description becomes so constant that it feels necessary. Without it, there is a fear of dissolving into the background of existence. The ego resists this dissolution because it equates control with survival. If there is no fixed self, who protects you? Who plans? Who defends? Who ensures continuity? Buddhism answers by shifting the focus from identity to awareness. Awareness does not need to protect itself. It is not an object that can be damaged. It simply observes. As you rest in awareness rather than in the story of self, a new kind of stability appears. Not the rigid stability of identity, but the flexible stability of presence. You stop clinging to who you think you are and start experiencing what you are in this moment. The difference is subtle but transformative. Many people unconsciously fear that if they stop thinking about themselves, they will become insignificant. Yet the opposite happens. Without the constant need to maintain an image, energy becomes available for genuine connection. You listen more deeply because you are not busy preparing your next line. You notice details because your mind is not filtering everything through personal narratives. This shift also softens anxiety about how others see you. If the self is not a fixed object, there is less pressure to defend it. Criticism feels less threatening because there is no solid identity to attack. Praise feels less intoxicating because there is no solid identity to inflate. You move through experiences without clinging to them as proof of who you are. The compulsion to mentally narrate everything loses its urgency. You no longer need to explain your life to yourself every second. Silence becomes spacious instead of frightening. It feels like stepping out of a crowded room into open air. There is also freedom in recognizing that thoughts are not the owner of consciousness. They are visitors. They come and go on their own schedule. You do not need to chase them or push them away. When you stop identifying with them, they lose the power to define you. Overthinking thrives on identification. The thought says, "This is happening to me," and you believe it. When identification loosens, the thought becomes just a sound in the mind, not a command. It loses the ability to drag you into endless loops. No self does not erase individuality. It removes the burden of defending it constantly. You can still have preferences, memories, goals, relationships. The difference is they are held lightly, not as proof of existence, but as parts of a flowing experience. This understanding also changes how you relate to time. The ego depends on past and future to maintain continuity. It says, "I was this person," and "I will become that person." Without these timelines, it feels unstable. But awareness exists only in the present. When you rest there, the need to mentally time travel decreases. You start to notice how much suffering came from trying to preserve a story that was always changing anyway. The effort to keep it intact created tension. Letting it evolve naturally brings relief. There is something deeply calming about realizing you do not have to perform existence. You do not have to narrate it, justify it, or prove it. Being is enough. Breathing is enough. Awareness itself is enough. From this place, thoughts become tools instead of masters. You use them when needed and set them down when not. You no longer fear their absence because you have discovered something more fundamental beneath them. This discovery dissolves the root of overthinking at a level deeper than techniques or strategies. It addresses the fear that fueled the habit in the first place. The fear of disappearing. The fear of not being someone. The fear of silence revealing emptiness. What you find instead is not emptiness as void, but emptiness as openness. A space where experience can unfold without being squeezed into rigid definitions. A space where life moves without needing constant commentary. And slowly, the mind learns that it does not have to keep shouting to be heard. Existence does not depend on noise. Presence does not depend on thought. Identity does not need to be reinforced every moment. You begin to rest in a quieter way of being. Not absent, not detached, but grounded without tension. The need to prove yourself fades because there is nothing to prove. You are already part of the unfolding of life, not separate from it. In this quiet, overthinking loses its purpose. The ego no longer needs to narrate every second to feel real. Awareness stands on its own, steady and calm, like a sky that does not depend on clouds to exist. And as this understanding settles deeper, the mind finally experiences something it had been chasing through endless thought but never found. Peace that does not come from control, from certainty, or from identity, but from letting go of the need to hold everything together. What remains is simple, spacious, and surprisingly gentle. A sense of being that does not need explanation. A presence that does not need protection. A life that no longer feels like something you must constantly manage to keep from falling apart. The fear of non-existence dissolves, not because you proved you exist, but because you discovered that existence was never something you had to defend in the first place. As the fear of non-existence begins to loosen its grip, something else quietly steps forward. The mind, no longer busy proving that it exists, starts searching for something to hold on to. It wants ground that does not move, answers that do not change, conclusions that promise safety. Because if identity is not solid, then certainty feels like the next best shelter. This is where a new tension appears, one that hides behind logic and responsibility, but is driven by the same old fear, the need to know for sure. A short truth waits here, sharp and uncomfortable. The mind does not chase answers because it loves wisdom. It chases answers because it fears the unknown. There is a particular restlessness that comes from not knowing how things will turn out. It feels like standing on a surface that shifts under your feet. The future refuses to give guarantees. People change without warning. Plans collapse despite careful preparation. The mind responds by trying to freeze reality into something predictable. It asks endless questions, not out of curiosity, but out of desperation. It wants a final answer that will silence uncertainty once and for all. This attachment to mental certainty quietly fuels anxiety. Every time the mind believes peace will arrive after the next explanation, it postpones peace. Every time it demands clarity before allowing itself to relax, it creates conditions that can never be fully satisfied. Because life does not provide absolute answers, it provides evolving situations. The need for certainty often disguises itself as problem solving. You tell yourself you are just trying to figure things out. But the emotional intensity behind it reveals something deeper. It is not just a search for solutions. It is a search for reassurance that nothing unpredictable will hurt you. The mind believes that if it can map every possibility, it can avoid every threat. Yet the map keeps expanding. Each answer leads to new questions. Each solution opens new uncertainties. Instead of calming down, the mind becomes more alert, more cautious, more tense. It starts scanning for hidden variables, unseen risks, overlooked details. Anxiety grows not because there are more dangers, but because the mind refuses to accept that some things cannot be known in advance. Buddhist teachings recognize this pattern as a form of grasping, not grasping for objects, but for certainty. The belief that peace comes from knowing everything. The practice points in the opposite direction. Peace comes from releasing the demand to know. Uncertainty is not an obstacle to peace. It is the environment in which peace must exist. When you stop resisting it, something surprising happens. The mind begins to relax because it no longer carries the impossible task of predicting the future. Think about how much tension comes from questions that have no immediate answer. Will this work out? Did I make the right choice? What will they think? How will this end? These questions linger because the mind insists on closure. It believes unanswered questions are dangerous, but most of life unfolds without final answers. You make decisions without full information. You move forward without guarantees. You adapt as new information appears. The attachment to certainty turns normal uncertainty into a threat. It transforms open possibilities into sources of fear. Instead of seeing the unknown as space where life can unfold, the mind sees it as a void that must be filled immediately. There is also a hidden belief beneath this pattern. The belief that uncertainty equals loss of control. If you do not know what will happen, you cannot control it. And if you cannot control it, you might get hurt. So the mind tries to convert uncertainty into knowledge, even if the knowledge is incomplete or speculative. Overthinking becomes the tool for this conversion. You analyze every angle, replay conversations, research endlessly, seek opinions, compare options until they blur together. Yet the more you search, the more fragile you feel. Because certainty built on thought alone is unstable. It depends on conditions staying the same, and conditions rarely do. Buddhism introduces a radical alternative. Instead of building stability from answers, build stability from awareness. Awareness does not need certainty to function. It meets each moment as it arrives. It adapts without panic because it is not anchored to expectations. Embracing uncertainty does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means recognizing the limits of prediction. You still plan, but you do not cling to the plan as a guarantee of safety. You still reflect, but you do not trap yourself in endless analysis. You still care, but you allow outcomes to unfold without demanding perfection. There is a quiet strength in saying, "I don't know what will happen, and that is okay." This statement does not weaken you. It frees you from pretending you can control everything. It shifts your focus from hypothetical futures to present capacity. Instead of worrying about every possible scenario, you strengthen your ability to respond to whatever arises. The mind often resists this shift because uncertainty feels like exposure. Without certainty, you cannot hide behind predictions. You must face the raw fact that life is unpredictable. But this exposure also brings relief. You no longer have to maintain the exhausting illusion of being prepared for everything. Certainty promises safety but delivers pressure. Uncertainty feels risky but offers space. Space to breathe, to observe, to adjust without panic. Space to experience life instead of trying to secure it in advance. Many people discover that their anxiety decreases not when they find answers, but when they stop demanding them. The nervous system calms when it is no longer forced to solve unsolvable questions. The body releases tension when it is allowed to exist without constant vigilance. Buddhist practice trains the mind to sit with unanswered questions without rushing to resolve them. This patience reveals that uncertainty itself is not painful. The resistance to it is what creates suffering. When resistance fades, uncertainty becomes simply another aspect of experience, not an enemy to defeat. There is also creativity in uncertainty. Fixed answers limit possibilities. Not knowing keeps the future open. It allows unexpected outcomes, new directions, opportunities that rigid plans would have blocked. Life's richness often appears in the gaps between what you expected and what actually happens. Attachment to certainty narrows perception. You become focused on protecting one outcome, ignoring others. When you release that attachment, perception widens. You notice alternatives, subtle shifts, emerging paths that were invisible when you were fixated on a single solution. This flexibility is a form of intelligence deeper than analysis. It is responsiveness rather than prediction. Instead of forcing reality to match your expectations, you adjust your expectations to match reality. This alignment reduces friction because you are no longer fighting what is. There is a moment when the mind realizes it has been asking the wrong question. Instead of "how can I be certain?" the question becomes "how can I be present without certainty?" This shift changes everything. Presence becomes the source of stability, not knowledge. You begin to trust your capacity to meet life as it unfolds. Not because you know what will happen, but because you know you can handle not knowing. This trust is quiet and steady. It does not depend on outcomes. It comes from direct experience of surviving uncertainty again and again. As this trust grows, anxiety loses its foundation. The fear of the unknown diminishes because the unknown no longer feels like a threat to your identity or safety. It becomes simply the space where life continues to move. Embracing uncertainty also deepens compassion. You realize everyone else is navigating the same unknown terrain. People act from fear, from hope, from incomplete information. Understanding this softens judgment. It replaces blame with empathy because you see the shared vulnerability beneath human behavior. There is peace in admitting that life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a process to be lived. Certainty seeks final conclusions. Uncertainty invites ongoing discovery. One closes doors, the other keeps them open. When you stop clinging to answers, the mind rests. It no longer races toward a finish line that keeps moving. It settles into the present, where uncertainty is not a problem but a condition of existence. And slowly the anxiety that once seemed permanent begins to dissolve. Not because the world became predictable, but because you stopped demanding that it be. You learned to stand in the unknown without shrinking, to breathe without guarantees, to move forward without needing the path fully mapped. This is the core Buddhist path to peace. Not the elimination of uncertainty, but the transformation of your relationship to it. The discovery that freedom lies not in knowing everything, but in being at ease with not knowing. As this understanding deepens, overthinking loses another layer of its power. The mind no longer needs to chase certainty to feel safe. It begins to trust the quiet stability of awareness itself, a stability that does not depend on answers, predictions, or control. And in that quiet stability, something unexpected appears. A calm that does not come from solving life, but from finally allowing life to remain unsolved. As the grip on certainty loosens, the mind searches for another place to hide. Without answers to cling to, it turns inward and builds something else, a shield made of thoughts. Because uncertainty was not the only thing it was trying to escape. Beneath the need to know was something far more uncomfortable, feeling, raw, unfiltered emotion that cannot be solved, predicted, or neatly explained. This is where the next layer of overthinking reveals its true function. A quiet truth waits here, one most people sense but rarely admit. The mind does not analyze everything because it loves clarity. It analyzes because it is trying not to feel pain. There is a reflex that activates the moment something hurts emotionally. A tightness in the chest, a sinking in the stomach, a heat behind the eyes. Before the feeling can fully rise, the mind steps in and starts working. It asks questions, searches for reasons, assigns blame, rewrites the situation from every angle. This activity looks productive, but it is actually avoidance. The emotion stays frozen beneath the surface while the mind circles above it like a guard refusing to let it pass. Overthinking becomes armor. It protects you from direct contact with your own vulnerability. If you can turn pain into a puzzle, you do not have to experience it as pain. If you can explain heartbreak, you do not have to sit inside the heartbreak itself. Analysis creates distance, and distance feels safer than exposure. This pattern often begins early in life. When emotions are dismissed, misunderstood, or overwhelming, the mind learns to manage them intellectually instead of somatically. It learns that thinking is safer than feeling, so every future discomfort triggers the same strategy. Retreat into the head. Build arguments, theories, interpretations, stay busy so the heart never has to speak. Yet the body keeps the truth. Emotions that are not felt do not disappear. They settle into muscles, breathing patterns, posture, sleep cycles. They appear as tension, fatigue, irritability, numbness. Overthinking may hide the pain from conscious awareness, but the nervous system continues carrying it. Buddhist teachings emphasize direct experience because liberation requires contact, not avoidance. You cannot free yourself from something you refuse to face. Feeling is not the enemy. Resistance to feeling is what prolongs suffering. When you allow an emotion to move through without interference, it completes its natural cycle. When you analyze it endlessly, you interrupt that cycle and keep it alive. There is a fear that if you stop analyzing, the emotion will overwhelm you. It will swallow you whole. But emotions are waves, not oceans. They rise, peak, and fall. It is the mind's interference that keeps them circulating. Each time you replay the story, you restart the wave. Each explanation renews the charge. Feeling instead of analyzing does not mean losing control. It means trusting the body's capacity to process experience. The body knows how to release stress through tears, trembling, deep breaths, stillness. These responses are not weaknesses, they are biological mechanisms designed to restore balance. Overthinking blocks these mechanisms. It holds the system in a suspended state, neither fully expressing nor fully resolving the emotion. This suspension becomes chronic tension. The armor that was meant to protect you ends up imprisoning you. There is also a subtle identity attached to this armor. Being the one who understands, who explains, who stays rational can feel empowering. It creates a sense of superiority over messy emotions. But this identity comes at a cost. It isolates you from your own humanity. It prevents genuine connection because connection requires vulnerability, not intellectual distance. True liberation comes from allowing yourself to be affected by life, not collapsing under it, but not numbing yourself either. Feeling deeply does not make you fragile, it makes you responsive. You move with experience instead of resisting it. Buddhism teaches that suffering intensifies when you add a second layer of resistance to the first layer of pain. The first layer is the raw emotion. The second layer is the mental struggle against it. Overthinking is often this second layer. It turns a simple feeling into a complex crisis. When you drop the second layer, the experience simplifies. Sadness becomes just sadness, not a problem to solve. Fear becomes just fear, not a catastrophe to prevent. Anger becomes just anger, not a moral failure to justify. This simplicity allows emotions to pass through without leaving heavy residue. There is courage in feeling without distraction. It requires you to sit in discomfort without reaching for escape. At first, this feels unfamiliar, even unsafe. The mind protests, urging you to think about something else. But if you stay, something shifts. The intensity softens, the body relaxes. The emotion loses its urgency because it has been acknowledged. Over time, you realize that emotions are not trying to destroy you. They are signals, information about your inner state. They point to needs, boundaries, losses, hopes. When you stop silencing them with analysis, they become guides rather than threats. This shift also changes how you relate to others. When you are no longer armored, you become more compassionate. You recognize the hidden pain behind other people's reactions because you are no longer hiding from your own. Empathy grows naturally when defensiveness dissolves. There is also freedom in not having to explain everything to yourself. Some experiences do not need interpretation, they need presence. A moment of grief does not require a lesson. A moment of joy does not require justification. Life can be experienced directly, without turning every feeling into a narrative. The mind fears this simplicity because it cannot control it. Analysis gives the illusion of mastery. Feeling requires surrender. But surrender here is not defeat. It is participation. You allow life to move through you instead of trying to contain it. The armor begins to feel heavy once you notice it. You see how much energy goes into maintaining it. The constant scanning for threats, the rehearsing of responses, the monitoring of your own reactions. Letting it fall away feels like setting down a weight you did not realize you were carrying. Without the armor, sensitivity returns. Colors seem brighter, sounds clearer, interactions more genuine. Pain is felt more directly, but so is joy. Numbness fades, replaced by a fuller range of experience. This fullness is what the mind was trying to protect you from, not realizing it was also protecting you from life itself. Buddhist practice encourages gentle observation of emotions as they arise, not pushing them away, not clinging to them, simply allowing them to be present. This observation creates space between awareness and reaction. You can feel without being consumed, witness without being trapped. In this space, the compulsion to analyze weakens. You see that understanding is not required for healing. Presence is enough. Attention itself has a soothing quality. It tells the nervous system that the experience is acknowledged, that it does not need to escalate to be noticed. There is also forgiveness in this process. Forgiveness for the times you avoided feelings because you did not know another way. Forgiveness for the habits that once protected you but now limit you. The mind built the armor out of care, not malice. It was trying to keep you safe with the tools it had. Now you are learning new tools, openness instead of defense, curiosity instead of fear, compassion instead of judgment. These tools do not block pain, but they transform your relationship with it. Pain becomes part of the human experience rather than something to eliminate at all costs. As this understanding deepens, overthinking loses another function. It no longer serves as a barrier between you and your emotions. Thoughts become lighter, less urgent. They return to their proper role as instruments of communication and planning, not shields against vulnerability. You start noticing moments when you feel something fully and it passes without leaving a trace. No rumination, no lingering tension, just movement. These moments build trust in the process. You realize you do not need to protect yourself from your own feelings. There is a quiet confidence that emerges from this trust, a sense that whatever arises can be met without panic. You no longer fear your inner world because you have stopped fighting it. The mind becomes calmer because it is not tasked with constant defense. This calm is not emptiness, it is spaciousness, a mind that can think when needed and rest when not. A heart that can open without fearing collapse, a body that can relax because it is not bracing for emotional impact. The illusion that analysis equals safety dissolves. You see that safety comes from resilience, from the ability to feel and recover, not from avoiding feeling altogether. Resilience grows through contact, not distance. As this layer falls away, the path becomes clearer. Letting go is not about controlling thoughts or suppressing emotions. It is about allowing experience to unfold without interference, trusting the wisdom of the body, the stability of awareness, the natural rhythm of feeling and release. And in this openness, something gentle appears. A peace that does not depend on solving problems or avoiding pain. A peace that comes from no longer needing armor at all. As the armor of overthinking begins to fall away, something unexpected becomes visible in the quiet that follows. Without constant analysis, without the defensive noise, there is a simple presence that was always there but rarely noticed. Yet the mind, still restless from years of habit, quickly tries to claim this presence as its own. It whispers that staying aware means staying busy, that watching your life requires constant commentary. This is where a subtle confusion takes root, one that keeps many people trapped even after they begin to let go. A small but piercing truth lives here. Awareness is silent, thinking is loud, and most people have spent their lives mistaking the noise for the silence. There is a common belief that being aware means constantly monitoring everything. Watching your thoughts, evaluating your feelings, tracking your reactions, interpreting your surroundings. This kind of mental surveillance feels like consciousness, but it is actually just another form of thinking. The mind has learned to imitate awareness by talking about experience instead of directly experiencing it. This imitation is convincing because it uses the language of mindfulness. You tell yourself you are being observant, reflective, attentive, but inside the mind is still racing, labeling, comparing, judging. Instead of resting in the moment, it is narrating the moment in real time. The difference is subtle but profound. Awareness receives, thinking interferes. Pure awareness does not comment, it does not analyze, it does not try to improve what it sees. It simply knows that something is happening. A sound is heard, a sensation is felt, a breath moves in and out. There is no need to add a story. The experience is complete on its own. Compulsive thought interrupts this completeness. It adds layers that were not originally there. A sound becomes a memory. A sensation becomes a worry. A breath becomes a measurement of how calm you are supposed to be. The mind turns simple presence into a project, something to manage rather than something to inhabit. This confusion traps people in mental noise, even when they are trying to be calm. They sit quietly, but keep thinking about whether they are doing it right. They observe their breath while secretly evaluating their progress. They attempt to watch their thoughts while generating new ones about the watching itself. The effort to be aware becomes another form of overthinking. Buddhist teachings emphasize the distinction because liberation depends on recognizing it. Awareness is not something you produce, it is something you notice. It was present before the thoughts arrived and remains after they fade. It does not need effort to exist, only attention to be recognized. When you rest in awareness, there is a sense of space around experience. Thoughts can appear without filling the entire field. Emotions can move without defining you. Sensations can arise without demanding interpretation. This space reduces suffering because it prevents identification. You are not trapped inside the content of your mind. Mistaking awareness for thinking collapses this space. You become absorbed in the content again, reacting as if every thought is urgent and meaningful. The mind regains control, pulling you back into the familiar cycle of analysis and distraction. There is also a fear behind this confusion. Pure awareness feels unfamiliar because it does not provide the stimulation the mind is used to. It is quiet, open, still. For someone accustomed to constant mental activity, this stillness can feel like emptiness or boredom. The mind panics and starts producing thoughts to fill the gap, believing that silence means something is wrong. But silence is not absence. It is presence without interference. It allows reality to reveal itself without distortion. Colors appear brighter, sounds become clearer, sensations feel more detailed. The world becomes vivid not because you are thinking about it, but because you are finally seeing it directly. Compulsive thought dulls this vividness. It overlays reality with concepts, expectations, memories. You see what you think should be there instead of what actually is. Awareness removes this filter. It returns perception to its original freshness. This shift also changes your relationship with time. Thinking pulls you into past and future, replaying what happened or anticipating what might. Awareness anchors you in the present, where life is unfolding now. Not as an abstract idea, but as a tangible experience. The feeling of your hands, the rhythm of your breath, the texture of the air around you. Many people discover that anxiety decreases when they reconnect with these immediate sensations. Not because the world has changed, but because their attention has returned from imagined scenarios to actual experience. The nervous system calms when it no longer has to respond to threats that exist only in thought. Awareness also reveals the impermanence of thoughts themselves. When you watch them without engaging, you see how quickly they change. A worry appears, intensifies, dissolves, replaced by something else. Without awareness, this process goes unnoticed, and the mind believes each thought is permanent. Awareness exposes their transient nature, reducing their authority. This realization weakens the habit of taking thoughts personally. Instead of my anxiety, it becomes an anxious thought passing through. Instead of my anger, it becomes anger arising in awareness. This subtle shift creates distance without suppression. You acknowledge the experience without being consumed by it. Confusing awareness with thinking prevents this distance. You remain entangled in every mental event, reacting automatically. The mind becomes both the storyteller and the audience, reinforcing its own narratives without interruption. Buddhist practice trains attention gently, not forcefully. You are not trying to eliminate thought or achieve a blank mind. You are learning to recognize the difference between observing and participating. Observing allows thoughts to exist without controlling you. Participating pulls you into their drama. There is compassion in this training because the habit is strong. Years of identification cannot be undone overnight. The mind will repeatedly drift into commentary. Each time you notice and return to awareness, you weaken the pattern slightly. Progress happens quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize the noise has softened. Awareness does not demand perfection, it accepts whatever arises. Even distraction becomes part of the field, something to be noticed rather than judged. This acceptance reduces internal conflict, which in turn reduces mental agitation. The clarity that emerges from this process is different from intellectual clarity. It is not about understanding concepts, it is about seeing directly. Seeing that thoughts are events, not facts. Seeing that awareness is constant even when the mind is chaotic. Seeing that peace is available beneath the surface activity. This clarity brings a new kind of freedom. You can engage with thoughts when useful and disengage when not. You can plan, reflect, communicate without becoming trapped in rumination. Thinking becomes a tool instead of a prison. There is also a rediscovery of simple joy. Without the constant mental filter, ordinary experiences feel richer. Eating becomes tasting instead of analyzing nutrition. Walking becomes sensing movement instead of rehearsing conversations. Listening becomes hearing instead of preparing responses. This return to immediacy reconnects you with life as it is happening, not as it is interpreted. It reduces the gap between you and your experience. The world feels less distant because you are no longer living inside your head. Over time, awareness begins to feel like home, a stable ground that does not shift with every thought, a quiet refuge that does not require effort to maintain. You can return to it at any moment, even in the middle of chaos, simply by noticing what is already present. This stability is what the mind was seeking through control, certainty, and defense. It was looking for something reliable. Awareness provides that reliability because it is not dependent on external conditions. It remains available regardless of what thoughts arise. The confusion between awareness and thinking dissolves gradually as this reliability becomes clear. You stop expecting thoughts to deliver peace. You stop searching for answers in analysis. You start trusting the silent presence that was there all along. And in this trust, the mental noise loses its dominance. It becomes background instead of foreground. You are no longer defined by the content of your mind. You are grounded in the space that holds it. What remains is simple but profound, a sense of being awake without strain, a calm that does not require silence outside because it exists inside, a clarity that does not depend on solving anything because it is not built from thought. The journey from overthinking to awareness is not about becoming someone new. It is about uncovering what was always beneath the noise. A presence that does not need to speak to be real. A knowing that does not depend on words. As this presence deepens, you realize that the freedom you were searching for was never hidden in better thoughts. It was hidden in the space between them. As awareness becomes clearer and the mental noise begins to fade into the background, another discovery quietly emerges. The silence that once seemed distant is now closer, almost within reach. Yet instead of relief, many people feel a subtle tension rising. The mind that was so eager to escape chaos suddenly hesitates when calm appears. Because beneath the noise, beneath the constant thinking, silence has been waiting. And silence is not empty, it is revealing. A quiet truth rests here, one that explains why the mind keeps returning to distraction. Silence does not threaten you because it is empty. It threatens you because it is honest. There is a reason people reach for their phones the moment a room becomes quiet. A reason music plays in the background even when no one is really listening. A reason conversations stretch longer than needed, not out of connection, but out of avoidance. Quiet moments remove the distractions that keep deeper feelings hidden. Without noise, the inner world becomes audible. The ego resists this exposure because it has spent years constructing a version of reality that feels manageable. It builds identities, stories, roles, explanations. These structures depend on constant reinforcement. Silence interrupts that reinforcement. When there is no external stimulation, The carefully maintained narrative begins to loosen. Questions appear that have no quick answers. Emotions surface that have been postponed. Truths that were easier to outrun begin to stand still in front of you. Many people mistake this discomfort for loneliness or boredom. In reality, it is confrontation. Silence confronts you with yourself without filters, not the version you present to others, not the one shaped by expectations, but the raw presence underneath all roles. This encounter can feel unfamiliar because it rarely happens in a world designed to keep attention scattered. From childhood, most people are conditioned to associate quiet with absence, empty rooms, paused conversations, waiting without stimulation. The nervous system learns to interpret stillness as something lacking, so it searches for activity to restore a sense of normality. Over time, this becomes automatic. The moment silence appears, the mind fills it. Buddhist teachings describe silence as fertile rather than empty, a space where clarity can grow because there is nothing competing for attention. But to experience this fertility, you must remain long enough for the initial discomfort to pass. The first layer of silence reveals restlessness. The second reveals buried thoughts. The third reveals deeper feelings. Only after these layers settle does the calm surface. The fear of silence often hides fear of unresolved experiences. Conversations left unfinished, losses not fully grieved, decisions still questioned. Noise keeps these experiences suspended, preventing them from settling into understanding. Silence invites them back into awareness so they can finally be processed. There is also a fear of insignificance that emerges in quiet. Without constant interaction or productivity, the ego wonders what remains. Who am I when I am not doing anything? What value do I have when no one is watching? Silence strips away external validation, leaving only intrinsic presence. For a mind accustomed to measuring worth through activity, this feels threatening. Yet intrinsic presence is where peace resides. When you no longer need to prove your existence through action or attention, you discover a steadiness that does not depend on circumstances. Silence becomes a refuge rather than a void, a place where you can rest without performing. The ego tries to outrun this discovery because it weakens its control. If you become comfortable in silence, you become less reactive to external pressures. You no longer chase approval as urgently. You no longer fear being alone. Independence grows quietly, and with it a different kind of confidence. This confidence is not loud or dramatic. It is calm, grounded, steady. It allows you to enter social situations without desperation and leave them without emptiness. You enjoy connection without relying on it to escape yourself. Silence teaches you that companionship with your own awareness is possible. There is also a cleansing quality to silence. When external input stops, the mind releases accumulated tension. Thoughts slow down not because you force them, but because there is nothing fueling them. The nervous system shifts from alertness to restoration. Breathing deepens. Muscles soften. The body returns to a state it rarely experiences in a noisy environment. This restoration is essential because constant stimulation keeps the stress response activated. Even pleasant noise requires processing. Silence gives the brain a chance to reset, to reorganize information, to repair. Many insights appear during quiet, not because you were searching for them, but because space allowed them to emerge. People often report creative breakthroughs during walks alone, showers, or moments before sleep. These are times when external input decreases and the mind settles. Silence creates the conditions for intuition to surface, a form of knowing that does not rely on analysis. The ego prefers analysis because it can control it. Intuition feels unpredictable, arising from a deeper level of awareness. Silence is the gateway to this deeper level, which is why it can feel unsettling at first. You are entering territory where the familiar rules of thinking do not apply. There is a moment when silence shifts from threatening to comforting. It happens when you stop resisting what appears in it. Instead of trying to escape discomfort, you allow it to be present. Gradually, the discomfort dissolves because it no longer needs to demand attention. What remains is a quiet spaciousness that feels safe in a way noise never could. This safety is not based on distraction but on acceptance. You trust that whatever arises can be witnessed without panic. Silence becomes a mirror that reflects without judgment. You see yourself clearly, not to criticize, but to understand. Understanding grows naturally in this environment. Patterns become visible. Habits reveal their origins. Reactions lose their mystery. You begin to see how much of your behavior was driven by avoidance rather than choice. This clarity allows change to happen gently, without force. The fear of silence diminishes as familiarity increases. What once felt like exposure becomes intimacy. You learn the texture of your own presence, the rhythm of your thoughts when they are not rushed, the subtle sensations that were previously drowned out by noise. Relationships also change when you are comfortable with silence. Conversations no longer need constant filler. Pauses become meaningful instead of awkward. Listening deepens because you are not anxious to fill the space with your own words. Connection becomes less about performance and more about presence. Silence also reveals the impermanence of everything you once feared. Emotions rise and fall, thoughts appear and fade, sensations change. Nothing stays long enough to define you permanently. This realization reduces the urgency to escape discomfort because you know it will pass on its own. There is humility in recognizing that life continues without your constant involvement. The world moves, people act, time flows whether you intervene or not. Silence lets you witness this flow without trying to control it. You become part of the movement instead of its manager. Buddhist practice often includes periods of silent retreat for this reason. Extended quiet accelerates the process of seeing through illusions. Without conversation or entertainment, the mind runs out of places to hide. It eventually settles, revealing a clarity that is difficult to access in noisy environments. But you do not need a retreat to experience this shift. Small moments of intentional silence can begin the transformation. Sitting without distraction, walking without headphones, pausing before responding. These practices create openings where truth can surface gently. Over time, silence becomes a trusted companion rather than a feared absence. You return to it not to escape life, but to reconnect with it more deeply. It becomes a place where you remember who you are beneath roles and responsibilities. And in this quiet companionship, the ego's need to outrun itself begins to fade. There is nothing to chase because nothing is missing. The truths that once felt threatening reveal themselves as simple facts of being human: imperfection, vulnerability, change, uncertainty. Accepting them brings relief because you no longer have to pretend otherwise. The hidden fear dissolves not because silence changed, but because your relationship with it did. What once felt like exposure now feels like home, a place where you can rest without armor, without explanation, without noise. As this understanding settles, you carry silence with you, even in busy environments. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of inner turmoil, a calm center that remains untouched by external chaos. And from that center, life feels less like something to escape and more like something to experience fully. Silence no longer exposes you, it supports you. It reminds you that beneath all the noise, peace was never far away. As silence becomes less frightening and more familiar, another hidden mechanism begins to reveal itself. Even in quiet moments, the mind sometimes pulls you back into old loops, replaying the same memories, the same worries, the same imagined conversations. You sit in stillness, yet the past returns uninvited. The calm you touched moments ago starts slipping away, replaced by a familiar heaviness. It becomes clear that silence alone does not end suffering. Something else has been shaping your inner world for years, quietly, repeatedly, almost invisibly. A short and unsettling truth lives here. What you think repeatedly does not just pass through your mind, it trains your mind. Rumination is not simply remembering or reflecting. It is the act of circling the same emotional territory over and over, wearing a path so deep that the mind begins to fall into it automatically. Each replay strengthens the habit, making it easier for the next thought to follow the same route. What once required effort becomes instinct. The mind learns where to go when it is idle, and too often it returns to pain because that path is the most familiar. Buddhist teachings describe karma not as punishment, but as momentum. Actions create tendencies, tendencies shape future actions, and the cycle continues. Rumination is karma in motion inside the mind. Every repeated thought becomes a seed planted in the soil of awareness. Water it enough times, and it grows roots that spread beneath the surface, influencing how you perceive everything else. You may believe you are just trying to understand what happened, but the mind is also conditioning itself to expect suffering. When a memory is replayed with strong emotion, the brain strengthens the neural pathways associated with that emotion. The next time something similar occurs, the reaction comes faster and feels more intense, not because the event is worse, but because the pathway is already carved. This is why small triggers can provoke disproportionate reactions. The mind is not responding only to the present situation. It is responding to the accumulated weight of every similar experience it has rehearsed. Rumination compresses time, bringing old pain into the present as if it never ended. There is also a subtle sense of familiarity that keeps rumination alive. Painful thoughts can feel strangely comfortable because they are known. The mind prefers familiar discomfort over unfamiliar peace. It clings to what it understands, even when it hurts. Letting go would require stepping into territory where identity and habits feel uncertain. Rumination often disguises itself as responsibility. You tell yourself you are learning from the past, preventing future mistakes, staying vigilant. But genuine learning moves forward. Rumination stays stuck, replaying without resolution. It keeps the wound open under the illusion of healing. This repetition shapes perception. When the mind is conditioned to expect disappointment, it begins scanning for evidence to confirm that expectation. Neutral events are interpreted negatively. Ambiguous situations are assumed to be threatening. The world appears harsher, not because it changed, but because your lens has been tinted by repetition. Buddhist practice interrupts this cycle by bringing attention back to the present moment, not as an escape, but as a reset. The present does not carry the same accumulated charge as the past. It offers fresh data, uncolored by old interpretations. When you anchor attention in immediate experience, the momentum of rumination weakens because it has nothing to feed on. Breaking the habit does not mean forcing thoughts away. Suppression creates resistance, which often makes the thoughts return stronger. Instead, the practice is to notice the loop without entering it. See the thought arise, recognize the familiar path, and gently return to what is happening now. This redirection is subtle but powerful. Each time you do it, you weaken the old pathway and strengthen a new one. Over time, the mind learns that it does not have to follow every thought to its conclusion. It discovers that awareness can observe without participating. This discovery changes the relationship with memory. The past becomes information rather than a trap. You can recall events without reliving the emotion attached to them. Rumination also affects the body. Repeated negative thinking keeps the stress response activated, flooding the system with hormones designed for short-term emergencies. When this state becomes chronic, it leads to fatigue, tension, sleep disturbances, and decreased immunity. The body carries the residue of mental habits long after the thoughts have faded. Recognizing this connection creates motivation for change. You are not only freeing your mind, you are restoring your physical well-being. Each moment of presence becomes an act of care for the entire system, not just the intellect. There is compassion in understanding how rumination develops. It often begins as an attempt to make sense of pain, to find meaning in experiences that felt overwhelming. The mind tries to protect you by staying alert, ensuring the same harm does not happen again. But protection turns into imprisonment when it never allows rest. True healing requires allowing the past to exist without constant supervision. Trusting that lessons learned will remain even if you stop rehearsing them. Trusting that awareness itself is enough to guide future decisions without endless review sessions. Forgiveness plays a role here as well. Not only forgiving others, but forgiving yourself for being human, for making mistakes, for not knowing everything at the time. Rumination often feeds on self-judgment, replaying scenes with harsher interpretations than anyone else would impose. Letting go of this judgment loosens the emotional charge attached to memory. As the cycle weakens, space opens for new experiences to shape the mind. Joy, curiosity, creativity, connection. These states cannot take root in soil dominated by rumination. They need openness, the willingness to let go of old narratives long enough for something different to grow. The future is influenced by what the mind practices today. If it practices fear, it anticipates danger. If it practices resentment, it anticipates betrayal. If it practices presence, it anticipates possibility. Karma is not destiny, it is direction. Change the direction, and the destination shifts. There is relief in realizing that you are not condemned to repeat the past internally. Habits can be unlearned. Pathways can be rerouted. The mind is plastic, capable of transformation throughout life. Each moment of awareness is a small turning point, a chance to choose a different trajectory. As rumination fades, time feels different. The past loses its grip on the present. The future loses its aura of inevitability. Life becomes more fluid, less constrained by narratives that once seemed permanent. You respond to situations based on what is happening now rather than what happened before. Relationships improve as well. When you are not projecting old fears onto new interactions, you see people more clearly. Trust becomes possible again because it is no longer overshadowed by remembered pain. You engage with reality instead of defending against ghosts. There is also a deepening of gratitude. Without constant comparison to the past, you notice what is here now. Small moments that would have been overlooked become meaningful. A conversation, a breath of fresh air, a quiet evening. Presence reveals richness that rumination concealed. Eventually, the mind experiences something unfamiliar yet deeply comforting. Rest without guilt. Stillness without anticipation of the next problem. A sense that life can be lived rather than managed. This is not forgetfulness. It is freedom from the compulsion to relive. The cycle of suffering breaks not with a dramatic event, but with repeated, gentle choices, choosing to return to the present, choosing not to follow the loop, choosing compassion over criticism. These choices accumulate just as rumination once did, creating new karma rooted in peace rather than pain. And slowly, the mind becomes a place you are not afraid to inhabit. Not a battlefield of memories and worries, but a landscape where thoughts come and go without leaving scars. The past finds its rightful place as history, not destiny. From this clarity, you see how powerful attention truly is. Where it goes, experience follows. What it repeats, life amplifies. Guarding attention becomes an act of wisdom, not restriction. You learn to feed what nourishes and starve what harms. In this way, the hidden machinery of rumination loses its influence. The future opens, shaped not by automatic patterns, but by conscious presence. The silence you once feared now holds possibility instead of echoes of old pain. And in that possibility a quiet confidence emerges. You are no longer trapped in what happened. You are no longer rehearsing suffering as if it were inevitable. You are living, moment by moment, guided not by habit but by awareness. This is the end of the cycle and the beginning of something new. Not a life without thoughts, but a mind no longer governed by them. Not a past erased, but a present finally free. As rumination weakens, something becomes clearer. The problem was never only that the mind repeated thoughts. The deeper issue is what those thoughts were doing. They were not just replaying events, they were rewriting them. They were turning moments into meaning, turning uncertainty into conclusions, turning feelings into identity. When the loop slows down, you can finally see the machinery behind it. The mind has been operating like a storyteller, and the story has often been the real source of pain. A short truth opens this next door. The event happens once, the story keeps happening. Something small can happen in real life, and the mind can turn it into a whole life sentence. A message is left unread, and the mind writes a story of rejection. A mistake happens, and the mind writes a story of failure. Someone's tone changes, and the mind writes a story of betrayal. The body feels a tension, and the mind writes a story of danger. In seconds, a simple moment becomes a heavy narrative, and that narrative becomes the experience you live inside. This is why suffering can feel bigger than what actually happened, because you are not only dealing with reality, you are dealing with the meaning your mind assigned to reality. The mind is not satisfied with facts. It wants interpretation. It wants explanation. It wants a clear villain, a clear reason, a clear outcome. And when life does not give that, the mind creates it. This storytelling is not random. It has a purpose. The mind believes stories create control. A story gives a beginning, a middle, and an end. It creates order out of chaos. It offers a reason for what happened and a prediction for what will happen next. It gives the ego a role to play. Victim, hero, failure, survivor, genius, outsider, misunderstood one. The mind clings to these roles because they feel solid. But Buddhism points to something uncomfortable. The story is optional. The story is not the event. The story is a layer placed on top of the event. And very often the suffering is born in that layer. A sound is just a sound until the mind says, that means something bad. A silence is just a silence until the mind says, they're pulling away. A delay is just a delay until the mind says, my life is collapsing. A small disagreement is just a disagreement until the mind says, I'm not loved. This is the mind as a storytelling machine. It takes raw experience and turns it into narrative. And narrative can be useful when you need to communicate or plan. But when narrative becomes compulsive, it becomes a cage. Notice how stories rarely stay neutral. They tilt toward fear. They tilt toward blame. They tilt toward shame. This is not because you are broken. It is because the brain is built to detect threats. It tries to protect you by creating explanations that prepare you for danger. But protection becomes suffering when it turns every moment into a warning. The mind doesn't just tell stories about the world, it tells stories about you. It says, this always happens to me. It says, I'm the kind of person who ruins things. It says, people can't be trusted. It says, I'm behind in life. It says, I'll never change. These stories feel personal, so you believe them. You don't treat them like thoughts. You treat them like truth. Buddhism calls this a form of ignorance, not as an insult, but as a description. Ignorance means not seeing clearly. The mind mistakes its own narration for reality. It confuses the map for the territory. It confuses the movie for the moment. When you start to see this, you begin to notice a gap. There is the event and there is the story about the event. The gap is where freedom lives, because in the gap, you can choose not to add suffering. A painful event can happen, and that pain is real. Buddhism does not deny pain. but it teaches that suffering is what gets added when the mind resists, judges, and builds identity around the pain. Pain is the first arrow. The story is often the second arrow. A person says something hurtful. That's the first arrow. Then the story arrives. They never respected me. No one ever sees me. This proves I'm not enough. The story multiplies the pain, extends it into the past, projects it into the future, and turns it into a statement about who you are. Now the pain has become a whole universe. The mind does this because it believes meaning will save you. If it can explain the pain, maybe it can prevent it. If it can label the experience, maybe it can control it. But the mind's meanings are often made in fear, and fear does not create wise stories. Fear creates dramatic stories. The mind is also addicted to completeness. It hates loose ends. It wants closure. It wants the final answer. But life is full of incomplete moments. People leave without explanations. Opportunities pass without clear reasons. Feelings change without permission. The mind fills the gaps with stories because emptiness feels unbearable. So it writes endings that are not real. It writes motives it cannot confirm. It writes judgments it cannot prove. This is where much social suffering comes from. Not from what people actually said or did, but from what the mind assumes it meant. You hear a short reply and the mind says, they're angry. You see a lack of enthusiasm and the mind says, they don't care. You notice distance and the mind says, they're about to abandon you. These are stories. They might be true sometimes, but the problem is how quickly the mind treats them as certainty. Attachment to stories creates anxiety because it makes you live in imagined realities. The body reacts as if the story is happening. Heart rate increases, sleep breaks, appetite changes, motivation drops. The nervous system responds to a movie, not to the moment, and the movie often has a dark script. Buddhism offers a practice that is both simple and difficult. Come back to what is actually happening. Not what it means, not what it might lead to, not what it says about you. What is actually happening? A thought says, this is bad. Awareness asks, what is here right now? Maybe it is a tightness in the chest. Maybe it is a heat in the face. Maybe it is sadness. Maybe it is disappointment. These are experiences. They do not require a story to exist. When you meet them directly, they can move. When you wrap them in narrative, they stick. A story is sticky because it creates identity. It creates a me who is threatened, a me who is failing, a me who is rejected. Then you feel the need to defend that me. More thoughts appear, more arguments, more rehearsals. The mind becomes a courtroom, and you are both the accused and the lawyer. This is why people can feel exhausted after doing nothing. They have been running mental trials all day, proving, defending, regretting, predicting. The body feels like it worked a full shift, because it did. It worked under the stress of narrative. When you start seeing the storytelling machine, you also start seeing how it distorts time. The mind can turn one moment into a lifetime. One bad day becomes, my life is going nowhere. One mistake becomes, I always ruin things. One awkward interaction becomes, I'm socially broken. This is the mind collapsing your identity into a single frame. Buddhism teaches impermanence to counter this distortion. Everything changes. Feelings change. Situations change. People change. Your mind changes. When you truly understand impermanence, you stop treating the mind story as final. You stop believing that today's narrative is a prophecy. You also stop treating your emotional weather as permanent climate. A storm in the mind is not a life sentence. It is a passing condition. But the story makes it feel permanent, because stories like permanence. They want firm conclusions. They want to lock reality into a clear meaning. Another reason storytelling creates suffering is that it often ignores complexity. Life is complicated, but stories simplify. They pick one reason. They pick one interpretation. They pick one label. I'm a failure. They're toxic. This is hopeless. These labels create a sense of certainty, and certainty feels safe for a moment, but it is false safety because it reduces your life into a narrow frame. When you reduce life, you reduce options. If you believe, I'm a failure, you stop trying. If you believe people always leave, you stop opening. If you believe nothing works out, you stop noticing what is working. The story becomes a self-fulfilling structure, not because the story is true, but because you live as if it is. This is why Buddhism emphasizes right view, not positive thinking, clear seeing. Clear seeing means noticing the mind's tendency to narrate and not being hypnotized by it. It means recognizing that a thought is not automatically a fact. It is an event in consciousness. A powerful practice is learning to name the process without engaging the content. Instead of, they don't love me, it becomes, a fear story is appearing. Instead of, I'm behind, it becomes, a comparison story is appearing. Instead of, this will end badly, it becomes, a prediction story is appearing. This shift is not denial, it is accuracy. You are identifying the mechanism, not obeying it. When you do this, something softens. The story loses its grip because it is no longer invisible. What is invisible controls you. What is seen can be released. The mind might protest, but I need my stories to survive. Yet look closely. Have the stories helped you rest? Have they made you kinder? Have they made you present? Or have they kept you tense, guarded, and tired? The mind's stories often claim they are protecting you, but they also steal your peace. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not about having no thoughts. It is about not being owned by thoughts. The mind can still tell stories, but you stop living inside them like they are the only home. You learn to stand in awareness, watching stories arise and pass, like hearing a radio in another room. You can listen if needed. You can turn it down. You don't have to dance to every song. As you practice this, you begin to taste direct experience. You feel sadness without turning it into a biography. You feel fear without turning it into prophecy. You feel regret without turning it into identity. This is not coldness. This is intimacy with life without extra suffering. There is also something deeply healing here. Many people carry stories that were given to them early. You're not enough. You're too sensitive. You're a problem. These narratives can echo for years, shaping self-image. When you recognize the mind as a storytelling machine, you start questioning these inherited scripts. You realize they are not you. They were inputs. They were repeated. They became familiar. But familiarity is not truth. When you stop feeding these stories, you create room for a new relationship with yourself. A relationship based on awareness rather than labels. You begin to meet yourself in each moment without dragging old narratives into it. You become less predictable in a good way, less trapped by old patterns, more open to change. This also transforms how you relate to others. When you are less trapped in your own stories, you stop forcing people into roles in your narrative. You stop needing them to be villains or saviors. You see them as complex beings with their own fears and habits. This reduces conflict because much conflict is not between two people, but between two stories. A person does something small, and your story says, they're disrespecting me. Their story says, I'm protecting myself. Two stories collide, and suffering grows. When you step out of story, you can communicate from reality. You can ask questions. You can listen. You can respond to what is actually happening instead of what you assume is happening. Stepping out of story does not mean becoming naive. It means becoming precise. You can still recognize patterns. You can still set boundaries. You can still take action. But you do it without the extra drama of narrative. You do it without turning every situation into a statement about your worth. There is a calm power in this. A mind that doesn't instantly create meaning is a mind that can see clearly. It can wait. It can observe. It can choose. Overthinking loses its fuel because the storytelling machine is no longer running unchecked. At first, it can feel strange to live without constant interpretation. The mind may say, "What do I do with this moment if I'm not narrating it?" You live it, you feel it, you breathe, you sense, you respond when response is needed, you rest when rest is needed. Life becomes simpler, not because it is less complex, but because you stop adding unnecessary layers. And in that simplicity, peace becomes possible. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything going right, but the steady peace that comes from not turning everything into a story of threat. The greatest shift is this: events are real, but they are not always personal. The mind personalizes everything to maintain its story. Buddhism invites depersonalization, not as cold detachment, but as freedom. Not everything is about you. Not every silence is rejection. Not every delay is disaster. Not every mistake is identity. When this lands, you stop carrying life as a heavy narrative. You start carrying it as experience, moment by moment. And experience is lighter than story. The suffering that once felt inevitable begins to look constructed. Not imaginary, but constructed. Built from interpretation, fueled by repetition, strengthened by belief. And what is constructed can be deconstructed. This is the gift of seeing the mind as a storytelling machine. You stop fighting the world and start understanding the filter through which you have been seeing it. You stop trying to fix every event and start noticing what you add to the event. And in that noticing, the mind grows quieter. Not because you forced it to be quiet, but because it no longer needs to keep writing the same painful scripts. The story loses its urgency when you are no longer using it as your shelter. What remains is something real: breath, sensation, presence, a life that doesn't need constant narration to be lived. And from this place, the next step becomes possible. If stories create suffering, then freedom is learning to meet reality before the story begins. As the stories begin to loosen their grip, another pattern quietly steps forward. Even without dramatic narratives, the mind still searches for something solid to hold on to. It wants guarantees, it wants protection, it wants a sense that nothing will suddenly fall apart. And when life refuses to offer that promise, the mind tries to manufacture it by scanning for danger before it arrives. The storytelling machine slows down, but the need for safety remains, shaping thoughts in a different way. A quiet tension lives here. The mind believes that if it prepares for the worst, it will not be hurt as deeply when pain comes. There is a strange comfort in expecting disaster. When you assume things will go wrong, uncertainty feels reduced. You tell yourself you are being realistic, cautious, prepared. But underneath that preparation is fear searching for certainty. Worst-case thinking becomes a shield, not because it protects you from reality, but because it protects you from surprise. The mind equates surprise with danger. It prefers predictable discomfort over unpredictable peace. If you already expect rejection, then rejection feels less shocking. If you already assume failure, then failure feels familiar. If you already picture loss, then loss feels rehearsed. The pain may still arrive, but the ego whispers, "At least we saw it coming." This habit forms slowly. Past experiences teach the mind that safety comes from anticipation. When something painful happened unexpectedly, the mind concluded that it should never be caught off guard again. So it developed vigilance. It began scanning for signs, rehearsing outcomes, mapping scenarios that might never occur. Over time, this vigilance became exhausting, yet it also felt necessary. You may notice how difficult it is to relax even when nothing is wrong. The body stays tense. The mind keeps checking. It looks for subtle threats in conversations, in facial expressions, in tone, in silence, in delays. The nervous system behaves as if danger is always nearby, even in calm environments. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. Psychological security becomes the hidden goal behind overthinking. Not happiness, not joy, not peace, just safety. Just the feeling that nothing unpredictable will break through the walls the mind has built. But life does not honor those walls. Change is constant. People evolve, situations shift, health fluctuates, opportunities appear and disappear. Control remains partial at best. Buddhist teachings begin by acknowledging this truth rather than fighting it. Security based on controlling external conditions will always feel fragile because the external world cannot be stabilized completely. Trying to secure it is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the more slips through. So the teaching shifts the focus inward. Instead of asking, "How do I make the world safe?" it asks, "How do I become steady even when the world is not?" This reframing is subtle but revolutionary. It replaces the search for guaranteed outcomes with the cultivation of inner stability. Inner stability does not mean numbness. It means the ability to experience uncertainty without collapsing. It means trusting that whatever arises can be met with awareness rather than panic. This trust is not blind optimism. It is built through direct experience of surviving past challenges. The mind learns that it has endured before, and that endurance did not come from prediction, but from presence. Worst-case thinking often creates suffering in advance. You live the imagined disaster repeatedly, feeling the emotions as if the event were already happening. Anxiety becomes a rehearsal for pain that may never arrive. Meanwhile, the present moment, which might be calm or even pleasant, is overshadowed by imagined futures. This is how the mind trades real peace for hypothetical safety. It sacrifices what is actually here for what might be there. The cost is enormous. Energy drains, sleep breaks, relationships suffer because attention is elsewhere. Opportunities pass unnoticed because the mind is occupied with defense. Buddhism calls this dukkha, the underlying dissatisfaction that arises when reality and expectation collide. Expectation wants certainty. Reality offers change. The friction between the two creates tension. Letting go of the craving for psychological security does not mean becoming careless. It means recognizing the difference between practical preparation and obsessive prediction. Practical preparation is grounded in reality. It involves taking reasonable steps based on available information. Obsessive prediction goes beyond that, trying to eliminate all uncertainty, which is impossible. For example, planning for a trip by checking weather forecasts and packing accordingly is practical. Imagining every possible accident, delay, illness, or failure for days before leaving is obsessive. One supports functioning, the other fuels anxiety. The mind confuses the two because both involve thinking about the future, but their emotional tone is different. Practical preparation ends when the task is done. Obsessive prediction never ends because it feeds on possibility. Inner stability grows when you learn to recognize this difference. You complete what can be prepared for, and then you return to the present instead of continuing the loop. You accept that beyond a certain point, control fades and trust must begin. Trust here does not refer to trusting that nothing bad will happen. It refers to trusting your capacity to respond. You may not control events, but you can cultivate the qualities that help you meet them. Patience, resilience, compassion, clarity. These qualities form a deeper kind of security than any external guarantee. Meditation practices train this directly. When you sit with discomfort without reacting immediately, you discover that sensations change on their own. Anxiety rises, peaks and falls. Fear appears and dissolves. Thoughts come and go without needing resolution. This experience rewires the belief that you must fix everything instantly to feel safe. Over time, the mind begins to relax its constant scanning. It realizes that not every sensation is a threat, not every thought is a warning, not every uncertainty is dangerous. Space opens where vigilance once dominated. Another layer of this craving involves identity. Some people unconsciously tie their sense of self to being the one who anticipates problems. Being prepared becomes a badge of competence. Letting go of worst-case thinking feels like losing an advantage, like stepping into vulnerability without armor. Yet true stability does not come from armor. Armor is heavy. It restricts movement. It isolates. Inner stability is lighter. It allows flexibility. It allows connection. It allows rest. Rest is often the most difficult part. Many people feel uneasy when they are not preparing for something. Stillness can feel like exposure. The mind whispers that danger might appear the moment you stop watching. This is the residue of old conditioning. Learning to rest without scanning becomes a form of healing. It sends a signal to the nervous system that safety can exist without constant effort. The body slowly releases tension it has held for years. Sleep deepens, breathing slows, the face softens. You start to feel what calm actually is, not as an absence of problems, but as an absence of hypervigilance. Relationships also change when the craving for psychological security loosens. You stop trying to control people's reactions or predict their behavior. You listen more openly. You respond instead of pre-defending. Connection becomes more genuine because it is not filtered through fear. Creativity returns as well. A mind obsessed with safety has little room for curiosity. It avoids risk, novelty, experimentation. When fear loosens, the mind can explore again. New ideas appear. Playfulness resurfaces. Life feels less like a survival task and more like a living process. Even decision-making becomes clearer. Anxiety often creates paralysis because every option carries imagined dangers. When you accept uncertainty, decisions can be made based on values rather than fear. You choose what aligns with your heart instead of what seems least risky. This does not eliminate pain from life. Loss will still happen, disappointment will still occur, but suffering is reduced because you are not layering anticipation on top of reality. You experience events as they unfold instead of fighting shadows beforehand. There is also humility in this path. Accepting uncertainty means acknowledging that you cannot foresee everything. It means letting go of the illusion that intelligence or effort can prevent all hardship. This humility opens space for compassion toward yourself and others. Everyone is navigating unpredictability, whether they admit it or not. Inner stability becomes a quiet anchor. It does not remove storms, but it prevents you from being swept away by them. You learn to feel fear without becoming fear, to notice anxiety without obeying it, to acknowledge risk without living inside it. Gradually, the mind stops clinging to worst-case scenarios as a survival strategy. It discovers that presence is more reliable than prediction. When something actually happens, awareness responds naturally. When nothing happens, peace remains undisturbed. This shift is not dramatic. It unfolds gently through repeated moments of choosing presence over projection. Each time you return to what is here instead of what might be, you strengthen a new pathway. The mind begins to trust calm as much as it once trusted fear, and in that trust, a deeper sense of safety appears. Not safety because nothing will change, but safety because you are no longer at war with change. You become like water rather than stone, able to move with circumstances instead of resisting them. Life regains texture, sounds feel clearer, colors feel richer, conversations feel more alive, not because the world transformed, but because the filter of constant threat assessment softened. You are finally here instead of guarding against everywhere else. This is the freedom hidden beneath the craving for psychological security. The discovery that true protection is not found in predicting every outcome, but in developing the capacity to meet whatever comes with awareness and compassion. And from this place, the path continues forward, not toward a life without uncertainty, but toward a life where uncertainty no longer steals your peace before anything has even happened. As inner stability begins to replace the need for constant prediction, another truth slowly comes into view. Even when fear loosens and the urge to control fades, the mind still has one final refuge. It escapes. Not into dramatic stories this time, not into worst-case scenarios, but into distance from what is actually happening. It travels backward into memories or forward into possibilities, rarely staying where life is unfolding. Safety is no longer sought through control, but through absence. The present moment, with its raw and unpredictable sensations, feels too exposed, so the mind quietly leaves it. A subtle sadness lives here. Life can only be touched now, yet the mind spends most of its energy somewhere else. Overthinking becomes a form of avoidance, not because the person wants to escape life consciously, but because direct experience feels too intense or uncertain. Thinking creates distance. It turns a living moment into an object to analyze instead of something to feel. When you think about your feelings instead of feeling them, you stay one step removed from their full impact. This distance can feel protective. If you stay in your head, you don't have to fully experience vulnerability, disappointment, loneliness, or even joy. Joy can feel risky too, because it reminds you that loss is possible. So the mind moderates everything through thought, like placing glass between you and reality. Living in imagined futures is one of the most common forms of this avoidance. The mind rehearses conversations that have not happened, prepares for outcomes that may never occur, constructs entire timelines filled with hypothetical problems. This activity gives the illusion of engagement, but it is actually disconnection. While the body sits in a room, the mind is somewhere else entirely, negotiating with shadows. Future thinking promises safety by suggesting that preparation will reduce uncertainty. But preparation that never ends becomes paralysis. You delay action because you are still planning. You delay rest because you are still calculating. You delay presence because you are still anticipating. Life becomes something you will start living after you finish thinking about it. The past offers another refuge. Memory becomes a place where the mind tries to correct what cannot be changed. It replays scenes with different words, different reactions, different endings. It imagines how things should have gone. This creates the illusion of control over something already finished. Yet the body relives the emotions each time, as if reopening a wound that had begun to close. Reconstructed pasts are rarely accurate. Memory is shaped by current emotions and beliefs. The mind edits details, highlights certain moments, ignores others, creating a narrative that supports its present identity. You may remember a conversation as harsher than it was, or an event as more humiliating than anyone else perceived. These reconstructions feed shame, anger, or regret, pulling you further away from what is actually happening now. Avoidance of the present is not always dramatic. It can look like constant distraction. Checking devices repeatedly, needing background noise, filling every quiet space with stimulation. Silence becomes uncomfortable because it removes the buffer between you and your own experience. Without distraction, sensations become vivid, thoughts slow enough to be noticed. Emotions rise without immediate outlets. Buddhist teachings place the present moment at the center of liberation because it is the only place where life is real. The past exists as memory. The future exists as imagination. Only now contains direct contact. When you avoid now, you avoid life itself. Direct contact with reality means feeling sensations as they arise without immediately labeling them. It means hearing sounds without constructing stories about them. It means noticing thoughts without following them into narrative. This level of presence can feel unfamiliar because the mind is used to operating through interpretation rather than experience. There is a rawness to the present that can be unsettling. Without the filters of memory or anticipation, you encounter life without cushioning. A difficult emotion is felt directly instead of analyzed. Physical discomfort is experienced without distraction. Uncertainty is acknowledged without escape routes. Yet this rawness is also where aliveness lives. Overthinking dulls this aliveness. It turns vibrant moments into conceptual puzzles. A sunset becomes a backdrop for worries. A conversation becomes an opportunity to analyze what was said and what should be said next. Even joyful experiences are interrupted by commentary. You may notice yourself thinking about how long the happiness will last or what might ruin it later. This commentary prevents immersion. You are never fully in the experience because part of you is observing, judging, planning, or remembering. It is like trying to swim while holding on to the edge of the pool. You never trust the water enough to let go. Avoidance of the present also protects identity. In the present moment, identity is fluid. Without stories about who you were or who you will be, there is just awareness. For the ego, this can feel like disappearance, so it keeps returning to past achievements or future goals to maintain a sense of continuity. Overthinking becomes a way to keep the self intact. Yet the paradox is that freedom lies in loosening that continuity. When you are not clinging to identity, you can respond more flexibly to life. You are not bound by old definitions. You can grow, change, adapt. The present becomes a space of possibility rather than a threat. Mindfulness practices train this return to now gently. Focusing on the breath anchors attention in a rhythm that is always happening. Sensations in the body provide immediate feedback about tension and relaxation. Sounds in the environment ground awareness in shared reality. These anchors are simple, but their effect is profound. They pull attention out of imagined timelines and back into lived experience. At first, the mind resists. It says there are more important things to think about. It claims that staying present is irresponsible, that vigilance is necessary. But with practice, you begin to see that presence does not eliminate intelligence or planning. It simply places them in their proper context. You plan when planning is needed, and then you return to living. Emotions also change when you stop avoiding them through overthinking. Fear feels different when experienced directly instead of analyzed. It becomes a sensation that rises and falls rather than a story that spirals. Sadness becomes a heaviness that moves through the body rather than a narrative about loss. Joy becomes warmth that spreads without needing justification. Relationships deepen as well. When you are present with another person instead of thinking about what to say next or what they might be thinking, you listen more fully. You notice subtleties in tone and expression. You respond authentically rather than strategically. Connection grows because presence is felt, even if it is not spoken. Avoidance of the present often stems from a belief that something better exists elsewhere. The mind promises that fulfillment will arrive when a future condition is met. When you achieve something, resolve something, escape something, this keeps you in pursuit mode, always reaching, never arriving. Presence reveals that life is not waiting in the future. It is unfolding continuously. There is also a fear that if you stop thinking, you will miss something important. But clarity often arises in stillness rather than in constant mental activity. When the mind quiets, insights surface naturally. Solutions appear without force. Creativity emerges without pressure. Overthinking crowds out these processes by filling every space with noise. Returning to the present does not erase responsibilities. It changes how you carry them. Tasks are handled one at a time instead of being piled together in anticipation. Challenges are addressed as they arise instead of being multiplied in advance. This reduces overwhelm because attention is not stretched across multiple imaginary scenarios. The body becomes an ally in this practice. Physical sensations are always anchored in now. feeling your feet on the ground, noticing the movement of your breath, sensing the weight of your body in a chair. These simple observations reconnect you with reality when the mind drifts into abstraction. There is humility in acknowledging how often the mind leaves the present. It is not a failure. It is a habit developed over years of trying to manage uncertainty. Each return is an act of patience rather than discipline. You do not force the mind to stay. You invite it back repeatedly until it learns that presence is not dangerous. Over time, the present loses its harshness. What once felt exposed begins to feel spacious. You realize that most moments are neutral or even peaceful when not filtered through fear. The intensity you feared was often created by anticipation rather than by the moment itself. Even pain becomes more bearable when experienced directly. Without the added layer of "why is this happening?" or "how long will this last?" pain remains contained in the present. It does not spread into imagined futures or contaminated pasts. It is felt, and then it changes. This is the hidden freedom in letting go of overthinking as avoidance. You stop living life through a protective screen. You step into it fully, with all its uncertainty and beauty. You discover that presence does not weaken you. It strengthens your capacity to respond because you are grounded in reality rather than projections. Gradually, the urge to escape lessens. The mind still wanders, but it no longer feels like the only place where safety exists. The present becomes a home instead of a battlefield. You trust yourself to remain even when discomfort appears. And in that trust, a quiet joy emerges. Not excitement tied to outcomes, not relief from solved problems, but a simple appreciation for being here. Breathing, sensing, witnessing. Life happening without needing to be managed constantly. From this place, the journey continues forward, not toward a life free from thought, but toward a life where thought serves experience instead of replacing it. As the present moment becomes less frightening and more familiar, another illusion begins to loosen its hold. Even when you stop escaping into the past or future, the mind still whispers that something is unfinished. It insists that peace is just one more realization away, one more insight, one more explanation, one final piece that will make everything settle. The restlessness no longer comes from avoidance, but from a quiet belief that resolution must be found before you are allowed to rest. A soft but persistent ache lives here. The feeling that something in your life remains open, unresolved, incomplete. The mind treats closure like a destination. It promises that if you just think a little longer, analyze a little deeper, replay events with more precision, you will finally reach a point where the tension disappears. This promise keeps the mental search alive. You revisit conversations, decisions, losses, endings, always believing that the right interpretation will bring relief. But the relief never lasts. You may feel clarity for a moment, only for doubt to return. New questions appear, new angles to consider, new details to examine. The search continues because it feeds on itself. The mind becomes addicted to resolution, chasing certainty as if it were oxygen. This addiction forms because uncertainty feels unbearable. When something ends without explanation, the mind fills the silence with speculation. It wants a clear story, a final statement, a reason that makes the pain logical. Without that, it feels exposed. Closure promises protection by turning chaos into order. Yet life rarely offers clean endings. People leave without giving reasons. Opportunities vanish without closure conversations. Relationships fade without a final scene. Illness appears without warning. Plans collapse without explanation. The mind struggles because it expects life to follow narrative rules, but life moves in fragments. Overthinking becomes a ritual for managing this discomfort. Each thought is treated like a tool that might finally solve the puzzle. You believe that understanding will release you, But the understanding you seek is often impossible because it depends on factors outside your control. Other people's motives, hidden circumstances, timing, chance. No amount of thinking can fully reconstruct what was never visible. This is where Buddhism introduces a radical shift. It suggests that closure is not something you discover, it is something you allow. Acceptance replaces explanation. Instead of solving the past, you acknowledge that it exists and cannot be changed. Instead of completing the story, you stop requiring completion. Acceptance is often misunderstood as resignation. It is not giving up. It is stopping the fight against reality. When you stop arguing with what has already happened, energy that was trapped in resistance becomes available for living. The past loses its power to dictate the present. The mind fears acceptance because it feels like letting something win. It equates acceptance with approval. If you accept what happened, does that mean it was okay? Does that mean the pain was justified? This confusion keeps the struggle alive. Acceptance does not validate harm or erase accountability. It simply recognizes that the event exists in the past and cannot be undone. You can still learn, still set boundaries, still seek justice where appropriate. But you stop replaying the moment as if repetition could reverse it. Closure also becomes a substitute for grieving. When something ends, there is often sadness, anger, confusion, emptiness. These emotions need space to move. Overthinking blocks that movement by keeping the focus on solving rather than feeling. You stay in analysis mode instead of allowing the emotional process to unfold. Grief does not require understanding, it requires presence. When you allow yourself to feel loss without demanding answers, the intensity changes naturally. It rises, falls, transforms. Over time, the sharp edges soften. This is the body's way of processing experience when the mind stops interfering. The false promise of closure also affects identity. You may believe that until you understand why something happened, you cannot move forward. Your sense of self becomes tied to the unresolved event. You define yourself by what is unfinished. Letting go feels like losing part of who you are, yet holding on keeps you anchored to a version of yourself that existed in that moment. Acceptance allows identity to evolve. You are not abandoning the past. You are allowing yourself to grow beyond it. Relationships are especially vulnerable to this illusion. When someone leaves, the mind searches for reasons endlessly. Was it something you said? Something you didn't do? Something you missed? These questions loop because they suggest that if you had known earlier, you could have prevented the outcome. This gives the illusion of control. But relationships involve two evolving people, each with their own fears, desires, and histories. No single explanation can capture that complexity. Closure may never come from the other person because they may not fully understand their own motivations. Waiting for their explanation keeps you suspended in uncertainty. Buddhist practice encourages releasing the need for external validation of your experience. You can acknowledge your pain without requiring someone else to confirm it. You can honor what you felt without needing the other person to agree. This autonomy frees you from waiting. Another layer of the closure illusion involves perfectionism. The mind believes that if you analyze long enough, you can extract the perfect lesson, the flawless understanding that will prevent future mistakes. But life does not operate on perfect lessons. Growth often comes from imperfect action, from moving forward without complete clarity. Acceptance allows learning without obsession. You take what is useful and leave the rest. You do not need to extract every possible insight before continuing. Sometimes the lesson is simply that not everything can be resolved. The search for closure also interferes with forgiveness. Forgiveness is not about excusing behavior, it is about releasing the emotional burden that keeps you tied to the past. When you forgive, you are choosing freedom over continued involvement in the story. But forgiveness requires letting go of the demand for a final explanation. You may never understand why someone hurt you. You may never know what could have been different. Forgiveness means accepting that lack of knowledge and choosing peace anyway. It is an act of self-compassion rather than generosity toward the other person. Acceptance gradually reveals something unexpected. The tension that drove the search was never about the event itself. It was about resistance to uncertainty. Once you accept that some questions will remain unanswered, the pressure to keep thinking dissolves. You no longer need to solve what cannot be solved. This creates space for new experiences to enter your life. When the mind is occupied with unresolved pasts, it has little capacity for present opportunities. Acceptance clears the clutter. It opens attention to what is happening now instead of what should have happened before. There is also humility in recognizing the limits of understanding. Human perception is partial. Memory is selective. Interpretation is subjective. Accepting these limits reduces the need for definitive closure. You allow life to remain complex without forcing it into simple conclusions. Over time, the compulsion to revisit the same questions weakens. The mind learns that peace does not come from answers, but from release. You stop treating thoughts like tools for fixing the past and start seeing them as temporary events that do not require action. The body responds as well. Muscles that were tense from constant mental effort relax. Breathing becomes deeper. Sleep improves because the mind is not running unresolved scenarios all night. Energy returns because it is no longer drained by repetitive analysis. Acceptance also restores trust in life's unfolding. You begin to see that many meaningful experiences came from situations that once felt unresolved. New relationships, unexpected opportunities, personal growth. Closure was not required for these changes to happen. Life moved forward anyway. This realization softens the fear of incompleteness. You understand that open endings are not failures. They are part of the human experience. Some chapters close without ceremony. Some questions remain unanswered. Some paths diverge without explanation. Peace comes from allowing this imperfection. You stop waiting for life to become tidy before you permit yourself to relax. You recognize that uncertainty is not a flaw in existence. It is the texture of existence. Gradually, the need for closure is replaced by something quieter: presence. Instead of trying to resolve the past, you engage with what is here. Instead of seeking final answers, you cultivate steady awareness. Instead of finishing the story, you step out of it. And in that step, a different kind of freedom appears. Not the freedom of having everything figured out, but the freedom of not needing to figure everything out. The mind rests because it is no longer chasing an endpoint that keeps moving. From this place, life becomes less about resolution and more about participation. You respond to what arises without carrying unfinished business into every moment. You trust that clarity will come when needed, and when it does not, you trust that you can still live fully. Acceptance ends the search, not by solving the mystery, but by dissolving the need for a solution. The past remains where it belongs. The present regains its depth. The future opens without the weight of unresolved narratives. And in that openness, the journey continues, lighter than before, guided not by the demand for closure, but by the quiet confidence that nothing essential is missing. As acceptance begins to loosen the grip of unfinished stories, another quiet fear surfaces beneath the calm. Even when the mind stops searching for answers, it still hesitates to relax completely. Something deeper feels unstable. Emotions continue to move, rising and falling without permission, and the mind does not trust this movement. It wants feelings to stay consistent, predictable, manageable. Without that stability, it fears being overwhelmed or lost. The search for closure may have ended, but the search for emotional certainty remains. A subtle discomfort reveals itself here. Feelings change. and the mind does not know where to stand. There is a hidden belief that peace means feeling good all the time. When sadness appears after a period of calm, the mind assumes something is wrong. When anxiety returns after relief, the mind panics, thinking the progress was an illusion. When joy fades, it feels like loss instead of transition. This resistance to emotional movement creates tension that is often more painful than the feelings themselves. Emotional impermanence is one of the most unsettling truths because it exposes how little control you have over your inner weather. Feelings arise due to countless factors: memory, physical state, environment, thoughts, interactions, even subtle bodily changes you may not notice. They do not follow a schedule. They do not ask permission. They do not stay simply because you want them to. The mind tries to solve this unpredictability through analysis. It searches for causes, patterns, explanations. It asks why the mood changed, what triggered it, how to prevent it next time. This process feels productive, but it often leads to paralysis. The more you analyze, the more variables appear. Each possible cause leads to another question. The mind becomes tangled in complexity, unable to settle. Analysis paralysis emerges when you treat emotions as problems to fix rather than experiences to observe. You delay action because you are waiting to feel certain. You hesitate to make decisions because your emotional state feels unstable. You postpone conversations because you fear reacting from the wrong place. Life slows down because the mind is waiting for a permanent emotional baseline that never arrives. Buddhist teachings approach this differently. They emphasize that emotions are processes, not identities. They are movements within awareness, not definitions of who you are. When you see them as passing phenomena, the urgency to control them decreases. You do not need to eliminate sadness to function. You do not need to freeze joy to preserve it. You allow both to exist without clinging. Observation replaces resistance. Instead of asking why a feeling is here, you notice how it feels in the body. Where is the tension? Where is the warmth? Where is the heaviness? How does it shift from moment to moment? This direct attention dissolves the illusion that emotions are solid objects. You see their fluid nature, their constant subtle changes. Peaceful observation requires patience because the habit of resistance is strong. The mind wants to intervene, to correct, to stabilize. It believes that letting emotions move freely will lead to chaos. But in reality, emotions often intensify when suppressed and soften when acknowledged. Fear of emotional impermanence also connects to identity. If your sense of self is built around being calm, confident, strong, or composed, the arrival of fear or vulnerability feels threatening. You may interpret it as regression or failure. This interpretation creates shame, which compounds the original emotion and prolongs its presence. When identity loosens, emotions become less personal. Fear can arise without meaning you are weak. Sadness can appear without meaning you are broken. Joy can fade without meaning something has been lost. Feelings become events rather than verdicts. Another aspect of this fear involves anticipation. The mind remembers past emotional storms and worries about their return. It tries to predict when the next wave will hit, scanning for early signs. This vigilance keeps the nervous system activated, making calm feel fragile even when nothing is wrong. Trust grows when you realize that you have survived emotional changes before. Every intense feeling you have experienced eventually shifted, even if it felt permanent at the time. This memory of resilience becomes a quiet foundation. You stop fearing the movement itself because you know it does not last forever. Overthinking interferes with this trust by replaying extreme scenarios. It suggests that next time might be worse, longer, unbearable. These projections keep you anchored in caution instead of confidence. Letting go of them allows emotional life to unfold naturally. Physical awareness helps here. Emotions manifest in the body through sensations: tightness, warmth, restlessness, fatigue. By focusing on these sensations rather than the story around them, you anchor attention in something tangible. Sensations change moment by moment, reminding you that nothing is fixed. Breathing practices are especially effective because breath connects mind and body. Slow, steady breathing signals safety to the nervous system, reducing the intensity of emotional reactions. This does not suppress feelings. It creates space around them, making observation possible without overwhelm. Fear of emotional impermanence also affects relationships. You may hold back from expressing love because you fear it will not last. You may avoid closeness because attachment feels risky. You may distance yourself when conflicts arise because you assume the tension will define the relationship permanently. Understanding impermanence allows for flexibility. A disagreement does not erase connection. A difficult period does not cancel shared history. Feelings toward others can fluctuate without destroying the bond. This perspective reduces panic during emotional shifts, allowing communication instead of withdrawal. Creative expression offers another outlet: writing, art, music, movement. These activities allow emotions to flow without needing precise analysis. They transform raw feeling into form, making it easier to witness without being consumed. The process itself becomes a form of observation. Nature also teaches impermanence without explanation. Weather changes constantly, seasons transition, growth and decay coexist. Observing these patterns can normalize emotional movement. Just as storms pass and sunlight returns, inner climates evolve without needing intervention. The fear that emotions will last forever often comes from moments when time felt distorted. During intense anxiety or grief, minutes can feel endless. The mind extrapolates this experience into the future, assuming permanence. But when calm returns, time resumes its normal rhythm. Recognizing this distortion helps weaken the belief in endless suffering. Acceptance deepens here. Not acceptance of specific emotions, but acceptance of change itself. You stop negotiating for stability and start trusting flow. This does not mean you stop caring about your well-being. It means you stop demanding guarantees before you allow yourself to live. Life becomes more spacious when you are not trying to freeze feelings in place. You can enjoy joy without fearing its end. You can experience sadness without fearing its permanence. You can move through anxiety without interpreting it as danger. Each emotion becomes part of a larger rhythm rather than an isolated crisis. Decision-making improves as well. You no longer wait for perfect emotional conditions before acting. You recognize that clarity can exist even when feelings are mixed. You move forward with awareness rather than waiting for certainty that may never come. Self-compassion plays a crucial role. When emotions change, instead of criticizing yourself for inconsistency, you treat the shift with kindness. You acknowledge that being human includes fluctuation. This compassion reduces the secondary suffering created by judgment. Gradually, analysis paralysis fades. The mind realizes it does not need to decode every feeling before responding to life. It trusts observation more than explanation. Action becomes possible again because you are no longer waiting for emotional stability as a prerequisite. There is freedom in this approach. You stop managing emotions like fragile objects that must be preserved or eliminated. You let them move like weather passing through an open sky. Awareness becomes the sky, vast enough to hold everything without being altered by it. This perspective also reduces fear of the future. If emotions are temporary, then even potential pain is not endless. You trust your capacity to experience and release rather than your ability to prevent. Courage replaces avoidance because you know that whatever arises will eventually change. Presence deepens because you are no longer distracted by monitoring your emotional state constantly. You can engage with conversations, tasks, surroundings, without checking whether you feel right. Life becomes direct again, less filtered through self-evaluation. Peaceful observation does not eliminate emotions. It transforms your relationship with them. You become a witness rather than a controller, a participant rather than a victim, a companion to your inner world instead of an adversary. From this place, a quiet steadiness emerges. Not because emotions stop changing, but because you stopped resisting their movement. Stability comes from flexibility rather than rigidity. Calm comes from trust rather than control, and in that trust, the journey continues, revealing that true peace was never about fixing what you feel, but about learning to remain present as feelings come and go like tides, leaving the shore unchanged beneath them. As emotions become easier to observe without resistance, another hidden layer begins to reveal itself. Even when fear softens and feelings are allowed to rise and fall, something inside may still cling to tension. Anxiety does not always disappear when you stop fighting it. Sometimes it lingers quietly, as if it still serves a purpose. The mind may no longer believe the thoughts, yet it hesitates to release the struggle completely. Beneath the surface, anxiety has been doing more than creating discomfort. It has been holding together a sense of identity. A quiet question appears here. If the problem disappears, who am I without it? There are people who have carried worry for so long that it feels like part of their personality. They describe themselves as anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, broken, complicated, damaged, behind. These labels become familiar. Familiarity creates comfort even when the content is painful. Anxiety becomes a constant companion, shaping routines, decisions, expectations, even relationships. When anxiety fades, a strange emptiness can appear. Without the problem, there is space. Without the struggle, there is silence. Without the tension, there is uncertainty about how to exist. The mind, used to operating in survival mode, suddenly has nothing to fix. This absence can feel disorienting, almost threatening, because identity was organized around managing the problem. Overthinking often maintains this identity unconsciously. By continuing to analyze, worry, and rehearse scenarios, the mind keeps the problem alive. Not because you want to suffer, but because the familiar structure of suffering feels safer than the unknown territory of peace. Letting go of anxiety can feel like stepping into a life you do not yet recognize. Some people become known for their struggles. Friends expect them to be the one who worries, the one who overthinks, the one who anticipates problems. This role creates a subtle form of belonging. If the anxiety disappears, the role changes. The person may fear losing connection or relevance. The mind protects against this by keeping the pattern active. There is also a sense of purpose tied to problems. When you are focused on fixing something, you feel engaged. There is a task, a mission, a direction. Without the problem, you may face open-ended freedom, which requires self-definition. Freedom demands choice, and choice can feel heavier than struggle. Buddhist teachings point out that identity itself is fluid. What you call me is a collection of habits, memories, reactions, preferences, and roles that shift over time. When identity is built around suffering, it becomes rigid because it relies on repetition. Anxiety must continue for the identity to feel stable. Letting go of that identity does not mean becoming empty or meaningless. It means discovering that you are not defined by the problems you solved or the pain you endured. Awareness exists before and after those experiences. You are not the story of your struggle. You are the space in which that story appeared. Fear arises because this space feels unfamiliar. Without labels, you may not know how to describe yourself. Without constant tension, you may not know how to measure your worth. Without problems, you may not know what to talk about. The mind prefers known discomfort to unknown openness. Healing sometimes triggers this fear. When symptoms improve, a person may unconsciously recreate stress to restore the familiar state. They might take on unnecessary responsibilities, dwell on minor issues, or reopen past wounds. This is not sabotage in a malicious sense. It is a reflex to preserve identity. Awareness breaks this cycle by revealing the mechanism. When you see that anxiety is being maintained to protect a sense of self, compassion becomes possible. You stop judging yourself for not getting better fast enough. You recognize that letting go involves redefining who you are, not just changing how you feel. Identity built from problems often begins early. A child who receives attention only when distressed may learn that suffering brings connection. A person praised for being strong in difficult situations may unconsciously seek difficulty to maintain that image. Over time, struggle becomes the lens through which life is experienced. This does not mean the suffering was chosen. It means the response to suffering shaped identity. The mind learned patterns that once helped survival. Those patterns continue even when they are no longer necessary. Freedom comes from separating the experience from the self. You can acknowledge that anxiety happened without calling yourself an anxious person. You can recognize that pain existed without building your identity around being wounded. Language matters because it shapes perception. Saying, "I feel anxious," creates space. Saying, "I am anxious," creates fusion. Exploring who you are beyond problems requires curiosity. What interests you when you are not trying to fix something? What brings quiet satisfaction without urgency? What feels natural when you are not performing a role? These questions open new pathways for identity to grow. Relationships may shift as well. People who are drawn to your vulnerability may react differently when you become stable. Some may celebrate it. Others may feel uncomfortable because the dynamic has changed. This can create grief, not because stability is wrong, but because change always carries loss alongside gain. Inner stability allows you to navigate these shifts without returning to old patterns. You can maintain compassion for others while staying true to your growth. You no longer need to shrink back into struggle to keep relationships intact. Creativity often flourishes when identity loosens. Energy that was consumed by worry becomes available for exploration. New interests emerge, new ways of expressing yourself appear. Life becomes less about managing damage and more about discovering possibility. The fear of losing identity also reveals how much the mind values continuity. It wants a consistent story about who you are. Change threatens that narrative, yet change is the only constant. Embracing this paradox allows identity to become flexible rather than fixed. Meditation practices support this by emphasizing observation without attachment. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, roles, all are seen as temporary phenomena. You learn to watch identity itself forming and dissolving. This perspective reduces the need to defend any particular version of yourself. When identity is not tied to problems, peace feels less fragile. You no longer fear that calm will erase you. You trust that presence itself is enough. You exist without needing a struggle to justify that existence. There is also a deep relief in no longer performing suffering. You do not have to prove how much you endured. You do not have to maintain an image of resilience. You can simply live, responding to each moment without referencing a past narrative. Self-worth shifts from achievement and endurance to inherent value. You do not need to earn your place by overcoming obstacles constantly. You belong because you are alive, aware, capable of connection. Letting go of problem-based identity also changes how you view others. You stop categorizing people by their struggles. You see them as evolving beings rather than fixed characters. Compassion grows because you recognize that everyone is navigating their own patterns. The mind may still try to return to familiar roles during stress. This is natural, Awareness allows you to notice without fully stepping back into the old identity. You acknowledge the pull without obeying it. Gradually, a new sense of self emerges, one that is not defined by pain, but by presence. This identity is lighter because it does not require maintenance through suffering. It can adapt as circumstances change. It can expand rather than contract. There is freedom in discovering that you are not the problems you faced, not the fears you carried, not the labels you accepted. You are the awareness that witnessed all of it. This awareness remains even when the problems dissolve. And in that realization, the journey continues, revealing that peace does not erase who you are. It reveals who you were before the struggle became your name. As identity loosens and you begin to sense that you are more than the problems you carried, another subtle difficulty can appear. Awareness grows stronger, but instead of bringing peace, it sometimes creates a new tension. You start watching yourself constantly, checking every thought, monitoring every emotion, evaluating every reaction. The struggle shifts from fixing problems to fixing the observer. What once felt like freedom becomes another form of pressure, as if you must now perform calmness perfectly. A quiet unease lives here, the sense that even your healing is being judged from the inside. Self-observation can begin as a healthy practice. You notice patterns, you become conscious of reactions, you slow down before acting. But when awareness turns rigid, it stops being supportive. It becomes surveillance. You watch yourself the way a critic watches a performance, searching for flaws instead of understanding. Each moment is measured against an invisible standard of how a peaceful person should behave. This hyperanalysis often comes from the desire to get everything right. You believe that if you observe carefully enough, you can eliminate all negative thoughts and uncomfortable emotions. You treat mindfulness like a tool for perfection, instead of a doorway to acceptance. The mind turns inward with the same intensity it once directed outward, creating pressure instead of relief. The body responds to this pressure with subtle tension. Breathing becomes shallow. Movements feel constrained. You hesitate before speaking because you are checking whether your words are mindful enough. Spontaneity fades because everything is filtered through analysis. Life becomes a performance of awareness rather than a lived experience. True Buddhist observation is different. It is soft, open, and curious. It does not try to control what it sees. It does not label experiences as success or failure. It allows thoughts to arise without chasing them and allows emotions to pass without interrogation. This gentleness is essential because force creates resistance, and resistance tightens the mind again. Hyperanalysis confuses observation with control. You may think you are being mindful when you are actually trying to manipulate your inner state. You watch your anger in order to suppress it, watch your sadness in order to eliminate it, watch your anxiety in order to prove you are not anxious. This creates a split inside you, one part judging, another part being judged. Gentle observation dissolves this split. Instead of standing against your experience, you stand with it. You become a witness rather than a supervisor. This shift changes the emotional tone immediately. Curiosity replaces pressure, compassion replaces criticism, presence replaces performance. Many people fall into the trap of self-observation because they misunderstand progress. They assume that a calm person never feels disturbed, never has intrusive thoughts, never reacts impulsively. When reality contradicts this image, they tighten their monitoring, hoping to correct themselves. But progress is not the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to meet difficulty without losing balance. Gentle awareness allows imperfection. It recognizes that thoughts are not under full voluntary control. Emotions arise from complex interactions between mind and body. Reactions sometimes happen before awareness catches up. Instead of treating these moments as failures, you treat them as information. You learn from them without turning them into self-criticism. This approach creates safety inside your own mind. You no longer fear noticing difficult thoughts because you know you will not punish yourself for having them. Observation becomes a supportive presence rather than a threatening spotlight. Hyperanalysis also disconnects you from the body. When you stay in your head evaluating your experience, you lose contact with physical sensations, yet the body is the anchor of presence. Feeling your feet on the ground, noticing the rhythm of your breath, sensing tension and relaxation, these experiences bring awareness out of abstraction and into reality. Returning to the body softens observation. Instead of analyzing why you feel anxious, you notice how anxiety feels. Instead of dissecting sadness, you feel its weight and texture. Sensation replaces story. This direct contact reduces the urge to overthink because there is nothing to solve, only something to experience. Another aspect of gentle observation is allowing attention to rest. Hyperanalysis keeps the mind in constant motion, scanning for changes, checking for improvement. Gentle awareness includes moments of simply being without effort. You sit, breathe, listen, exist without evaluating the experience. This rest is not laziness, it is recovery from the strain of constant monitoring. Nature demonstrates this kind of awareness effortlessly. A tree does not watch itself grow. A river does not analyze its flow. Growth happens through participation, not inspection. When you relax into experience instead of dissecting it, life unfolds more naturally. Relationships improve when observation becomes gentle. Instead of analyzing every interaction afterward, you stay present during the conversation. You listen without rehearsing responses. You feel connection instead of measuring performance. Communication becomes authentic because you are not dividing attention between the moment and your internal commentary. Creativity also returns when hyperanalysis fades. Artistic expression requires freedom from self-judgment during the process. When observation becomes supportive rather than critical, ideas flow without interruption. You allow mistakes, experiments, surprises. This openness mirrors the natural creativity of the mind when it is not constrained by fear of imperfection. Gentle observation does not mean passivity. It includes discernment, the ability to recognize harmful patterns and make adjustments. But these adjustments arise from clarity rather than pressure. You change because you see clearly, not because you feel forced. Trust grows as you experience the effectiveness of this approach. You realize that awareness itself guides behavior without constant interference. When you are present, your responses become more aligned with your values naturally. You do not need to micromanage your reactions. There is also a deeper layer of humility in this practice. You acknowledge that control is limited, that the mind is complex, that growth is gradual. This humility reduces frustration because you stop expecting immediate transformation. You allow development to unfold at its own pace. Self-compassion becomes the foundation of observation. When you notice suffering, you respond with kindness rather than critique. This kindness soothes the nervous system, making it easier to remain present. Harsh observation, on the other hand, activates defense mechanisms that push you back into avoidance. Over time, the quality of awareness changes. It becomes spacious instead of narrow. You are aware of thoughts without being absorbed by them, aware of emotions without drowning in them, aware of sensations without clinging to them. Experience flows through awareness like clouds through sky, leaving the sky unchanged. This spaciousness allows joy to arise naturally. When you are not preoccupied with monitoring yourself, you notice simple pleasures more easily: the warmth of sunlight, the taste of food, the sound of laughter. These moments restore balance because they remind you that life is not only about self-improvement. Even difficult experiences become more manageable within this space. Pain is still felt, but it does not dominate awareness completely. there is room for other sensations, other thoughts, other perspectives. Suffering decreases because it is not amplified by resistance. The trap of self-observation loosens when you recognize that awareness is already present. You do not need to manufacture it through effort. You simply relax into what is here. This relaxation does not reduce clarity, it enhances it. A calm mind sees more accurately than a tense one. Eventually, observation becomes as natural as breathing. It does not feel like a technique you are applying. It feels like your default way of being. You respond to life with openness instead of vigilance, curiosity instead of fear. From this place, mindfulness fulfills its true purpose. Not as a tool for control, not as a measure of worth, but as a gentle companion to experience. Awareness becomes a form of kindness toward yourself and the world. And in that kindness, the journey continues, revealing that true peace does not come from watching yourself perfectly, but from allowing yourself to exist without needing to be watched at all. As observation becomes gentler and less intrusive, another hidden pattern quietly steps forward. Even when you stop judging your thoughts and allow emotions to move freely, the mind can still cling to one final defense. It wants to be correct. It wants to be justified. It wants proof that its view of the world is valid. Awareness may have softened the inner critic, but the ego still looks for ground to stand on. When that ground feels threatened, the mind prepares for battle long before any conflict appears. A quiet tension lives here. The feeling that you must win conversations that may never even happen. You may notice yourself replaying arguments in your head, crafting responses, sharpening explanations, predicting what the other person might say and how you will counter it. This rehearsal feels productive, as if you are protecting yourself from being misunderstood or dismissed. But the deeper motive is often preservation of identity. Being right confirms who you believe yourself to be. Being wrong feels like erosion. Attachment to being right grows from insecurity rather than confidence. When your sense of worth depends on being correct, disagreement feels like danger. A different opinion is not just another perspective, it becomes a challenge to your stability. The mind responds by tightening, preparing defenses, gathering evidence to support its position. These mental rehearsals consume enormous energy. You may walk through entire imaginary debates while doing ordinary tasks. Conversations repeat with new variations, each one ending with you finally proving your point. Yet the relief never lasts because the argument was internal, not real. The mind remains unsatisfied, waiting for actual validation. This pattern also distorts perception. When you are attached to being right, you listen selectively. You focus on details that confirm your view and ignore those that contradict it. You interpret neutral statements as attacks because they threaten your position. Communication becomes a competition instead of a connection. Buddhist teachings highlight the difference between truth and attachment to truth. Seeking understanding is healthy. Clinging to correctness is limiting. Truth does not need defense because it is not owned by anyone. It can be explored from multiple angles. Ego, however, needs certainty to maintain its boundaries. The need to be right often masks a deeper fear of being insignificant. If your ideas are dismissed, you may worry that you will be dismissed too. If your perspective is challenged, you may feel unseen or unheard. The mind protects against this by rehearsing stronger arguments, hoping to secure recognition. Gentle awareness reveals that validation does not come from winning. It comes from being present and authentic. When you release the need to dominate conversations, you create space for mutual understanding. You can listen without preparing counterpoints. You can speak without needing the last word. This shift transforms relationships. Instead of debates, interactions become dialogues. You become curious about other perspectives rather than defensive. Curiosity reduces tension because it replaces the assumption of threat with interest. Even disagreement can become enriching instead of exhausting. Attachment to being right also fuels resentment. When someone does not acknowledge your viewpoint, the mind holds on to the interaction, replaying it with frustration. This prolongs the emotional impact long after the conversation ended. Letting go of the need to be validated frees you from carrying these unresolved conflicts. The body reflects this attachment as well. Tight jaw, clenched shoulders, shallow breath. The nervous system prepares for confrontation even in calm environments. Releasing the need to win allows the body to relax, restoring balance that constant vigilance disrupts. Humility becomes a powerful antidote. Recognizing that your perspective is limited does not diminish you. It opens the possibility of learning. You can hold your views lightly, adjusting them as new information appears. This flexibility is a form of strength, not weakness. Self-inquiry can help uncover the roots of this attachment. Ask yourself what you fear would happen if you were wrong. Often the answer reveals concerns about respect, belonging, or competence. Addressing these fears directly reduces the need for defensive thinking. Silence also plays a role. Choosing not to respond immediately when challenged allows space for reflection. You may discover that not every disagreement requires resolution. Some differences can exist without threatening connection. Silence becomes a form of wisdom rather than avoidance. The practice of compassion extends here too, understanding that others cling to their views for similar reasons. Fear, insecurity, desire for recognition softens your reactions. You see that conflict is rarely about facts alone. It is about emotional needs seeking expression. Over time, mental rehearsals lose their appeal. You no longer need to prepare for imaginary confrontations because your sense of self is not at stake. Conversations become opportunities to share and learn rather than arenas to defend territory. Freedom emerges when you realize that being understood is more valuable than being right. Understanding fosters connection. Correctness alone can create distance. When you prioritize understanding, you focus on listening deeply and expressing clearly rather than winning. This does not mean abandoning your values or accepting harmful behavior. It means engaging with firmness without aggression, clarity without rigidity. You can stand for what matters while remaining open to dialogue. Peace follows naturally because the mind is no longer occupied with endless rehearsals. Attention returns to the present moment, where life is actually happening. Energy once spent on imagined debates becomes available for creativity, relationships, and rest. You also become less reactive to criticism. Instead of interpreting it as an attack, you evaluate whether it contains useful information. If it does, you learn. If it does not, you release it. Your stability no longer depends on universal agreement. The ego's grip loosens when you see that identity does not need constant defense. You are not your opinions. You are the awareness that can hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. This awareness is spacious enough to allow disagreement without fragmentation. From this place, communication becomes an act of connection rather than assertion. You speak to share, not to dominate. You listen to understand, not to prepare responses. Conversations become collaborative explorations instead of battles, and in that collaboration the journey continues, revealing that true strength is not proven by being right, but by remaining open even when certainty feels safer. As the need to be right begins to loosen, the mind loses one of its familiar ways of creating certainty. Without arguments to rehearse and positions to defend, a strange openness appears. At first, this openness feels peaceful. Then something unexpected follows. Instead of calm, a wave of uncertainty can rise, because when you stop clinging to fixed answers, you start seeing how many possibilities exist. Life no longer looks like a narrow path with clear directions. It looks like an endless field of options, each one carrying unknown consequences. A quiet pressure builds here, the feeling that every choice could change everything. Modern life magnifies this pressure in ways previous generations never experienced. Every day you are presented with countless decisions about career, relationships, lifestyle, identity, beliefs, and future plans. Even small choices feel loaded with meaning because there is always another option that might be better. The mind becomes overwhelmed, not by lack, but by excess. Choice was supposed to create freedom, yet too much of it often creates paralysis. When possibilities multiply, the fear of making the wrong decision grows stronger. You hesitate, delay, research endlessly, compare scenarios, imagine outcomes, then circle back to the beginning without resolution. The mind tries to calculate the perfect path through a world that refuses to be predictable. This constant evaluation drains energy. Instead of living, you remain suspended in analysis. The present moment becomes a waiting room where you prepare for a future that never arrives. Even when you make a decision, doubt follows closely behind, whispering about alternative paths you did not choose. Social comparison intensifies this anxiety. You see countless examples of how others are living, achieving, traveling, creating, succeeding, failing, reinventing themselves. Each example becomes another possible life you could be living. Instead of inspiring you, this abundance of models can make your own path feel inadequate or uncertain. The mind interprets these possibilities as obligations. If you could be anything, then you feel pressure to choose the best version of yourself. Ordinary choices begin to feel like permanent commitments. Mistakes appear catastrophic because they seem to close off other paths forever. Buddhist simplicity offers a different perspective. It does not deny the existence of choices, but it questions the assumption that more options equal more happiness. Simplicity is not about deprivation, it is about clarity. When unnecessary complexity is removed, the mind becomes calmer because it no longer has to process endless alternatives. One way simplicity dissolves chaos is by narrowing attention to what truly matters. Instead of trying to optimize every area of life simultaneously, you focus on a few meaningful directions. This focus reduces noise because you stop evaluating options that do not align with your values. Contentment also plays a role. When you appreciate what is already present, the urgency to chase every possible improvement decreases. You realize that fulfillment does not come from exhausting all possibilities, but from engaging deeply with the life you have chosen. Presence transforms decision-making as well. When you are fully in the current moment, choices become responses to actual conditions rather than imagined futures. You act based on what is needed now, not on projections about distant outcomes. This grounded approach reduces anxiety because it does not require predicting everything. Letting go of perfection is essential here. No choice can guarantee a flawless future. Every path includes uncertainty and change. Accepting this truth frees you from the impossible task of selecting the ideal option. You choose with sincerity, knowing that adjustments can be made along the way. Simplicity also encourages trust in adaptability. Instead of trying to foresee every scenario, you develop confidence in your ability to respond when situations arise. This trust reduces the need for exhaustive planning because you know you are capable of navigating unpredictability. Physical simplicity supports mental clarity too. Environments filled with excessive stimuli keep the mind in a state of alertness. Reducing clutter, limiting distractions, and creating calm spaces allows the nervous system to relax. External order influences internal calm more than people realize. Digital consumption is a major source of overload. Constant exposure to information, opinions, trends, and possibilities keeps the mind spinning. Choosing intentional boundaries around technology creates breathing room for reflection and stillness. Routine can become a stabilizing force rather than a limitation. When certain aspects of life are structured, you conserve energy for meaningful decisions instead of spending it on trivial ones. Routine reduces the number of choices you must make each day, lowering cognitive strain. Acceptance of uncertainty becomes a form of liberation. Instead of treating unpredictability as a threat, you recognize it as a natural aspect of existence. This shift changes anxiety into curiosity. You become open to discovery rather than fixated on control. Relationships benefit from simplicity as well. When you stop evaluating people based on endless criteria or comparing them to idealized alternatives, you can appreciate them as they are. Connection deepens because it is not filtered through constant judgment. Gratitude anchors attention in reality. By noticing what is working, what is present, what is meaningful, you reduce the tendency to scan for better options elsewhere. Gratitude interrupts the restless search for improvement and replaces it with appreciation. Creativity flourishes when mental chaos subsides. With fewer competing possibilities, ideas can develop fully instead of being abandoned for the next new concept. Depth replaces distraction. You create from intention rather than impulse. Rest becomes possible too. The mind that is always evaluating cannot relax. Simplicity allows you to disengage from decision-making temporarily, restoring energy. Rest is not wasted time. It is preparation for clear action. Over time, a new relationship with choice emerges. Decisions become expressions of values rather than attempts to control the future. You choose based on alignment, not optimization. This approach brings peace because it connects action with purpose. You also learn that paths are not fixed. Choosing one direction does not erase others permanently. Life offers opportunities for change, redirection, and growth. The fear of missing out decreases when you see that existence is fluid, not a single irreversible trajectory. Inner stability replaces external certainty. When calm comes from within, you do not depend on perfect circumstances to feel secure. This stability allows you to navigate complexity without being overwhelmed by it. The anxiety of infinite possibilities dissolves when you realize that freedom is not about having every option open. It is about being at peace with the options you choose. Simplicity reveals that clarity is more valuable than abundance, and presence is more powerful than prediction. And in that clarity, the journey continues, showing that a peaceful mind is not created by expanding choices endlessly, but by learning how little is actually needed to live fully. As the noise of endless choices begins to settle, a different kind of restlessness often reveals itself. Even when life becomes simpler and the number of decisions decreases, the mind does not always become quiet. It finds another way to stay busy. Instead of scanning the world for possibilities, it starts scanning time itself. Moments that are gone are replayed as if they could be changed. Moments that have not arrived are rehearsed as if they must be controlled. Simplicity may clear the external chaos, yet the inner movement between past and future can continue without pause. A subtle ache lives here, the feeling of being everywhere except where your life is actually happening. Mental time travel feels useful at first. Revisiting the past seems like a way to learn. Rehearsing the future seems like a way to prepare. But when these habits become constant, they stop serving clarity and start producing suffering. You relive conversations that ended long ago, replaying them with different outcomes, sharper responses, better timing. You revisit mistakes, searching for a version of yourself who could have prevented them. Each replay carries the emotion of the original moment, as if the event is happening again. The body cannot distinguish between memory and reality when the experience is vivid. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, breathing shifts. You feel shame, anger, regret, or sadness, as if the past is still unfolding. The event may be finished, but the emotional charge remains active because attention keeps returning to it. Future rehearsal works in a similar way. The mind projects scenarios forward, anticipating what might go wrong, what could be lost, what needs to be managed. These imagined situations trigger the same physiological responses as real threats. Anxiety builds not because something is happening, but because something might happen. This creates suffering that exists only in the mind's simulation. The present moment may be calm, yet the nervous system behaves as if danger is immediate. You carry tension into situations that do not require it, exhausting yourself before anything has even occurred. Mental time travel also prevents closure. When attention repeatedly returns to unfinished emotional experiences, the mind keeps them open. You cannot integrate the lesson because you are still reliving the event instead of allowing it to become part of the past. Healing requires distance, but constant replay erases that distance. Identity becomes tied to these temporal loops. You define yourself by what happened to you or by what you fear might happen. Instead of experiencing life as a series of unfolding moments, you experience it as a narrative anchored in memory and expectation. This narrative shapes perception, filtering new experiences through old interpretations. Buddhist teachings emphasize the uniqueness of the present moment. The past exists as memory, the future as imagination. Only the present is directly experienced. When attention rests here, suffering decreases because there is nothing to resist. You respond to what is actually happening, not to echoes or projections. Presence does not mean forgetting the past or ignoring the future. It means relating to them without being consumed by them. You remember without reliving. You plan without obsessing. Memory and anticipation become tools instead of traps. The practice of noticing sensations anchors attention in the present. Feeling the breath, the contact of the body with the ground, the sounds in the environment. These experiences exist only now. They interrupt the momentum of time travel by redirecting awareness to what is tangible. Emotions shift when you remain present. Instead of amplifying them through storytelling, you experience their physical qualities directly. Sadness becomes heaviness in the chest. Anxiety becomes fluttering in the stomach. Observed in this way, emotions move and change naturally rather than intensifying through mental repetition. Forgiveness plays a role in releasing the past. Holding on to resentment or guilt keeps the mind tied to previous events. Forgiveness does not excuse harmful actions. It frees you from carrying them forward. It allows the past to remain where it belongs instead of occupying your current experience. Acceptance dissolves future rehearsal. Recognizing that not everything can be controlled reduces the urge to simulate endless scenarios. You prepare where possible and trust your ability to respond to what cannot be predicted. This trust reduces anxiety because it replaces hypervigilance with confidence. Grief often surfaces when time travel slows. You may feel sadness for moments that cannot be revisited or fear of time passing. Allowing this grief is part of returning to presence. It acknowledges the reality of change without trying to escape it through memory or anticipation. Joy also becomes more accessible. When attention is not divided between past and future, you notice subtle pleasures that would otherwise be overlooked. Warmth, color, texture, connection. These experiences ground you in life as it unfolds. Sleep improves when mental time travel decreases. Rumination and worry often intensify at night because there are fewer distractions. Learning to return attention to simple sensations calms the mind, making rest possible. Relationships deepen when you are present. Instead of interpreting interactions through old wounds or future fears, you engage with the person in front of you as they are now. Listening becomes genuine because you are not simultaneously reliving previous conversations or anticipating outcomes. Creativity emerges from presence as well. New ideas arise when the mind is not preoccupied with replaying or rehearsing. You respond to inspiration in real time instead of filtering it through past expectations or future concerns. The passage of time feels different too. Moments seem fuller because you are experiencing them directly. Life no longer feels like something slipping away unnoticed. Each day becomes distinct rather than blurred by constant distraction. Presence also reveals impermanence clearly. Everything changes, including thoughts, emotions, circumstances, relationships. Seeing this directly reduces attachment because you understand that clinging cannot stop change. Acceptance replaces resistance. Compassion grows from this understanding. You recognize that others are also navigating their own memories and fears. Instead of reacting to their behavior defensively, you respond with patience. This softens conflict and strengthens connection. The mind still travels through time occasionally. This is natural. The goal is not to eliminate memory or planning, but to prevent them from dominating awareness. When you notice the movement, you gently return to the present without judgment. Over time, this returning becomes easier. Presence becomes a familiar place rather than an effortful practice. You trust that what you need to know will arise when needed, not through constant rehearsal. Peace emerges not because life becomes predictable, but because you are no longer fighting time itself. You stop trying to rewrite what has already happened or control what has not yet arrived. You meet life where it is, moment by moment. And in that meeting, the journey continues, revealing that suffering is not created by time passing, but by leaving the only moment where life can actually be lived. As attention returns to the present and the pull of past and future begins to loosen, a deeper resistance can still remain. Even when you stop replaying what has already happened and rehearsing what has not yet come, the mind may struggle with something more subtle. It is not only afraid of memories or possibilities, it is afraid of life moving on its own. Without constant mental interference, events unfold in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled. This openness can feel unsettling, as if you are standing without armor in a world that refuses to follow a script. A quiet vulnerability appears here. The feeling of not knowing what comes next and having no strategy to guarantee safety. Overthinking often disguises itself as responsibility. You tell yourself that careful analysis prevents mistakes, protects people, preserves opportunities, and ensures stability. Yet beneath this logic lies a deeper fear. The fear that if you stop managing every detail, everything will collapse. The mind becomes convinced that control is the only barrier between order and chaos. This belief creates constant tension because reality does not cooperate. Plans change. People behave unpredictably. Circumstances shift without warning. When events diverge from expectations, the mind interprets it as failure and doubles its effort to regain control. You analyze more, predict more, worry more, hoping to prevent further surprises. But life continues to unfold according to countless variables beyond your influence. The more you resist this truth, the more exhausted you become. Control becomes a full-time occupation that never delivers lasting security. Even when things go as planned, anxiety lingers because you know it could change again at any moment. Trust offers an alternative, yet trust feels risky because it requires releasing the illusion of certainty. Trust does not mean passivity or indifference. It means recognizing that effort has limits and that life contains intelligence beyond your calculations. When you trust, you still act, but you no longer believe that everything depends on your vigilance. Nature reflects this principle constantly. Seasons change without supervision. Growth happens without forcing. The body heals without conscious direction. These processes demonstrate that unfolding is the default state of existence. Resistance, not flow, creates friction. Overthinking interrupts this flow by inserting commentary into every experience. Instead of responding naturally, you pause to evaluate, compare, anticipate, and correct. This interruption creates hesitation where spontaneity would have been sufficient. Opportunities pass because you are still deciding how to approach them. Fear of letting life unfold also limits resilience. When you try to prevent all difficulty, you avoid situations that could strengthen you. Challenges become threats instead of catalysts for growth. Trust allows you to face uncertainty with confidence that you can adapt. Relationships reveal this dynamic clearly. Attempts to control outcomes, how someone feels, what they say, how they respond, create pressure that weakens connection. When you allow relationships to evolve naturally, authenticity replaces performance. You discover that closeness grows through shared experience, not through strategic management. Creativity depends on surrender as well. New ideas often appear when you stop forcing solutions and allow the mind to wander. Insight arises in relaxed states, not under pressure. Trusting the process enables innovation that analysis alone cannot produce. The body also benefits from releasing control. Chronic tension relaxes when you stop anticipating problems constantly. Breathing deepens. Sleep improves. Energy returns because it is no longer consumed by vigilance. Physical calm reinforces mental calm, creating a cycle of restoration. Trust develops gradually through experience. Each time you allow a situation to unfold without interference and discover that you can handle the outcome, confidence grows. You realize that unpredictability does not equal disaster. It simply means you are participating in a living process rather than following a fixed plan. Letting go of control does not eliminate responsibility. You still make choices, set intentions, and take action. The difference is that you act with openness instead of rigidity. You remain responsive instead of defensive. This flexibility allows you to navigate change without losing balance. Acceptance becomes the foundation of trust. Accepting that uncertainty is unavoidable reduces the shock when it appears. You meet change with readiness instead of resistance. This readiness transforms anxiety into alertness, a calm awareness that adapts quickly. Gratitude strengthens this perspective. When you notice how many aspects of life function without your control, the support of others, the stability of the earth, the continuity of time, you recognize that existence itself is a collaborative process. You are part of something larger, not the sole manager of reality. Trust also deepens connection to intuition. When analytical thinking quiets, subtle signals become clearer. You sense what feels right without needing exhaustive justification. Intuition is not irrational. It integrates experience in ways conscious reasoning cannot fully articulate. Failure becomes less threatening when trust is present. Instead of interpreting setbacks as proof that control is necessary, you see them as information guiding future choices. Learning replaces self-blame. Growth replaces stagnation. Letting life unfold reveals unexpected opportunities. Paths appear that planning alone would never have produced. Encounters happen by chance. New interests emerge spontaneously. These moments demonstrate that not everything valuable can be predicted. Joy becomes simpler too. When you are not preoccupied with managing outcomes, you can appreciate experiences as they happen. Laughter, connection, discovery, these arise naturally when attention is free from constant monitoring. Over time, the fear of uncertainty transforms into respect for life's complexity. You stop expecting guarantees and start valuing participation. Each moment becomes an invitation rather than a test. Trust also brings humility. You recognize that control was never absolute, only perceived. This realization softens the need to dominate situations and people. Cooperation replaces force. Patience replaces urgency. Peace emerges from this shift. Not because everything becomes stable, but because your relationship with instability changes. You no longer fight the current of events. You move with it, adjusting course when needed, resting when possible. And in that movement, the journey continues, revealing that freedom is not found in controlling how life unfolds, but in learning how to unfold with it. Overthinking was never your strength. It was fear wearing the mask of intelligence, control pretending to be safety, noise pretending to be awareness. Every loop, every sleepless night, every imagined scenario was the mind trying to protect something it believed was fragile. But what you discovered is that peace was never on the other side of one more thought. It was waiting in the space you were afraid to enter, the space of letting go. When you stop fighting uncertainty, life stops feeling like a threat. When you stop narrating every moment, existence becomes lighter, quieter, real. You don't disappear when the thinking slows down. You finally appear. Calm replaces urgency, trust replaces tension, and the silence you once feared becomes the place where freedom lives. If something in this message reached you, write in the comments, "I choose peace over control." It's not just a comment. It's a decision your future self will remember. And if you want more teachings that quiet the mind, strengthen the heart, and help you live without fear, subscribe to the channel and join this journey. Your calm is not far away. Take a breath, let go, and step into the life that was waiting for you all along.